Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm a little bit out of breath there, Arthur. I had to race around, got caught in the rain. I must be unfit, and raced inside, dried myself off, and here I am. So here we are with part 2 of our Fred Veltman report, our study, our interview, our conversation into that incredible 8-year-long church-sanctioned and paid-for event. Great to have you back, Arthur.
Thank you.
And I'll just get people to just give us a quick nod in the comments if you can hear our voices okay. We've got George Tishi saying, here we go again. Yeah, hey, George, good to have you here. Can you just go testing 1, 2, Arthur, and someone will just quickly let us know that they can hear your voice okay.
Yes, we're back again tonight, and let's see what we can do. See if we can reach some agreements as to what the Veltman study really told us.
Awesome. And we've got Andy Mack has said, sounds great. And good to have you on the program too, Andy. You've been on a journey in the last 3 or 4 months, haven't you? And it'd be great to have you on the show one day and talk about it. So my very special guest, hang on, I'm just getting calls coming through from my wife. I better just quickly message her on that. So I'm just going to read a couple of comments that came through on YouTube and Messenger overnight, and just that I think they may be a good reference point to keep in the back of our mind. And I'll just open that up. So yeah, just ponder. There's about 3 quite long paragraphs I'll just read there, Arthur, and just get your thoughts on that. Bringing them up. By the way, we are live on Instagram today for the first time as well. So we're live into 2 Facebook groups, Instagram, Twitter, and of course YouTube as well. So welcome everybody. Now, I'm just going to read this. Page 26 of Introduction A of the LOCRP, which stands for, what's that stand for again, Arthur?
I'm sorry, say again, what?
The LOCRP.
Life of Christ Research, I imagine.
Life of Christ Research Project. And that's a good thing to type into to search if you're trying to find it as well.
Right.
Page 26 of Introduction A of the LOCRP puts the bias plainly. The writings which form the subject matter of this research project are those of a special author, a prophetic personality, traditionally, especially in the ecclesiastical community where the writings of Ellen G. White have special importance. The literary works of a prophet have been placed on a different level from those of the ordinary writer, even a Christian writer. The qualitative difference of the prophetic experience, ordinarily described under the term inspiration, has usually carried with it a special understanding of the prophet's writing methods, source of information, and even literary standard. To apply the critical methods of scholarship to such writings is viewed by some to be a breach of faith. It is often assumed by devout believers in such prophetic writings that anyone undertaking or promoting such an investigation has, in so doing, already declared his or her lack of faith in the special claims of the author under review. I thought that was a really good comment there on the interview yesterday on the YouTube channel, because it highlights why we were getting quite some aggressive attacks in the comments. Because once you place someone on that kind of a pedestal, any kind of cross-examination comes across as if you lack faith or are critical. And I think that's why there's so much cognitive dissonance going on, because she's already held in such a high position. You just cannot question her the way you'd question anyone else. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that's clearly the case. And it in no place is it more clearly spelled out than if you go back in your thoughts to when Ronald Numbers wrote Prophetess of Health. One of the things that Church was most upset about is in his introduction, Numbers stated that he was not taking the approach a priori that she was a prophet, that he was going to examine her just as he would any other figure in history. And that incensed the white estate and caused when I was reading complaints the church leadership had about Numbers book, that was the major point that they always referenced.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting that the person that we just read from, that page 26 on the introduction A, is from Veltman. He's creating this bias even in his own work by saying, even though we said yesterday he kind of approached it as a historian with not too much bias, in the introduction he goes, the writings which form the subject matter of this research project are those of a special author, a prophetic personality. So that's already why, in his mind, in spite of all the evidence, even he himself fell into the trap.
Oh, yes. He had been the chair of the Department of Religion at Pacific Union College. He was a creature of the church. And by saying he was a creature of the church, I don't mean to be insulting. It's just that he is. We are all are creatures of our backgrounds. And you can't spend a career working for an organization and not be a creature of that organization. Yeah. And it's not evil. It's just natural. And that happened.
And so as soon as you elevate her to that position of being a special author, a prophetic personality, that's why the criticism, or anything that we said yesterday that it wasn't even criticism, is met with such a pushback. And here's another one. This is Robert Lindbeck. He very much inspired me to do this actually a couple of years ago. And so I think he's excited to see that it's actually happening. I also read a lot of the book last night. You got it handy, that we've been kind of using as a resource. Can you hold the cover up again?
Yes.
I bought it last night. It's in the you'll have to do your mirror image.
I need to flip my. Yeah. Let me see. There is a control here someplace.
If you go to the settings at the bottom, it looks like a little cog. Just click that, and then under that, you'll see mirror. But I bought it last night, $11.50 Australian. Highly recommend that people go and buy that book. I'll get you to hold it again. The Desire of Ages and Its Sources, Warren C. Trenchard. And I got a good way into it last night. Read for a few hours. Wow. It is really good book.
Very well done.
So, so Robert Lindbeck writes, is an explanation of the different grades of literary reliance. I think there were 7. This allowed plenty of leeway to pass over the literary borrowing, also with which different person looking at chapters, it meant there was a degree of inconsistency in how the items were categorized. I thought that was an interesting point too.
Yeah.
So, right. Well, let's get started today. And
let me give a couple of quotes that I think are important to sort of set the tenor and to set the tone and give a background. One of the things that sets us up for this being a real problem, the major thing that sets us up as being the big problem, is Ellen White's statements and attitude of her own. I'm going to quote from a letter 329A. This you can find in the White Estate, letter 329A, 1905. She said, "I am now looking over my diaries and copies of letters written for several years back. I have the most precious matter to reproduce and place before the people in testimony form. While I am able to do this work, the people must have things to revive past history, that they may see that there is one straight chain of truth, without one heretical sentence in that which I have written. This, I am instructed, is to be a living letter to all in regard to my faith." I mean, she put herself up. People often say she didn't put herself up on a pedestal. It was the church that did it. This was a symbiotic relationship. She put herself up on the pedestal, and the church gladly went along with it. And the church has been able to use the White Estate and her writings to to good purpose, at least insofar as the organization itself is concerned. I want to read a couple of other quotes, and I think it goes to the heart of why the church seems so threatened anytime someone challenges or is seen to challenge or appears to challenge Ellen White, whether it's Ronald Numbers, whether it's Desmond Ford, or anyone else. This is a quote from John Robertson in The White Truth from 1981. He says, "The influence of the spirit of prophecy is woven into the warp and woof of Adventist faith, life, and organization. What we are as a church is a reflection of our faith in the divine authority evident in the writings of Ellen G. White." And then from the Review and Herald Supplement of August 14, 1883, "Our position on the testimonies is like the keystone to the arch. Take that out, and there is no logical stopping place till all the special truths of the message are gone. Nothing is surer than this, that this message and the visions belong together and stand or fall together."
Wow.
And so that's been a consistent approach, and it's an existential threat when anyone ever says anything that challenges Ellen White. When Desmond Ford says you can't find the investigative judgment in Scripture, and Ellen White's interpretation or endorsement of that is wrong, the church couldn't stand for that. He had to go.
Yeah. And people say, oh, it's contextual, and when did she say that, and all this kind of thing. Like you're saying, it's a thread that weaves itself right through from the beginning.
Yeah, and that quote from John Robertson, and that quote from the Review and Herald Supplement of August 14 of 1883, that wasn't her. That was the Review and Herald speaking in the one case, and John Robertson in the other. And John Robertson wasn't a free agent out there just saying whatever he might want. The White Estate, I'm pretty confident, though I frankly don't have anything to really prove it, but the timing that it came out and the way the church promoted it right away. In fact, that they beat Walter Ray to the publishing press tells me a lot about that. The White Estate wanted that work out there.
And they must have known what his title was going to be, though, to call it the White.
Yes. True.
It's funny, I read that book after I'd read The White Lie. I think I mentioned yesterday I started reading The White Lie, and I couldn't keep reading it. I had to stop reading it. And It wasn't until the early 90s that I read Ron Numbers' book, and then was able to read The White Lie after it. And then I read The White Truth, so like years and years later. And The White Truth raised more questions in my head than provided answers.
Well, that can happen. That can happen.
Okay, so with that as a backdrop, that really there is that symbiotic relationship between Ellen White, the church, and the people in the pews. They all want to see it a certain way. Where are we at with Fred Veltman's study?
I thought I would pick up some of the chapters where Veltman told us his findings. It's interesting because there are some chapters where there's not nearly so much of borrowing that they were able to establish. But for instance, one of the concluding chapters, I think it's the very last chapter that they reviewed. They said, well, chapter 84. They said it's the final chapter of what we reviewed, and they said the general content of the chapter revealed only over 50 uses of more than 25 books and articles, many limited to single aspects of the account. So they were just kind of picking their various things that came out of various places, which helps to understand that when we realize, according to what we learned yesterday and what Veltman told us yesterday, and that is that Ellen White throughout her lifetime wrote in these little scrapbooks, these little books, various things that came to her. And frankly, Peter, it appears things that she found in books that she liked, she'd write them down. And then when it came down to, or copy them down. And then when it came time toward the end of her life, when Marion Davis was collating these things and collecting these things out of these scrapbooks, she was pulling these things out and doing some rewriting of them. And so, as Veltman pointed out, the quotes from other places, the borrowing, the appropriation of other people's work is more obvious the farther back you go. You read it in the scrapbooks, and it's more obvious. It goes through a couple of editing jobs, and Marion Davis's good work of making it read better, and it's not as obvious. It's not as easily seen, and that was one of the handicaps. There was one chapter here where they didn't have any scrapbooks that had that material in it, and so it was much harder. They had a far more difficult time of finding the sources than they did with some of the others where there are scrapbooks.
I wonder too that Marion and Fanny appeared to be in the dark about the borrowing until later, when they did start to raise concerns. I wonder if Ellen, just in her journals and these scrapbooks, she'd just write stuff down. She didn't even put that where she got it from in her scrapbook.
Oh, no.
Because they just took her scrapbook, so they had no idea of quotations or anything.
Yes, I suggest they probably had no way of knowing it was Ellen, except for one thing. And that is that one of the things you see often when they talk to her copyists, is what they called the people, and that's not a judgment, it's just what they called them, copyists. If they found things, it appears to me that when they found things that were her original work, that the quality of it was far less. And I've heard people speak who have done research in her writings, and they say that sometimes, not always, but sometimes the quality of the work is very shoddy. She wasn't an educated person, and it showed. And so it would seem to me these weren't stupid people who were the copyists. And I wonder, it must have occurred to them as you read various things, and some of them are very polished, and some are really rough, thinking, are these really her original works?
Yeah, and that probably, that process of them stumbling across those kind of paragraphs, Fanny and Marion did start to raise issues.
Yeah, I could see how that could easily happen. It could very easily happen.
I was also last night reading some of the, is it William Hanna?
Yes.
Yeah, I found a copy of his book online, and I read quite a couple of chapters at least of that. And Marion improved even on his work.
Marion was obviously very skilled.
Yeah.
And Ellen White wrote several times how fearful she was of losing her.
Yeah.
That she was so valuable to her. And that's not a criticism of Ellen White either. It's a fact, and is one that she recognized and that she feared. So, and it would have crippled her ability to turn out these books.
Yeah, 100%. Did Marion stay with her right to the end?
I'm not certain of that. I have this feeling that she died before Ellen White.
Yeah.
But I'm not absolutely certain of that. I couldn't say that.
In the comments.
Somebody may know, because we have a lot of people who are very knowledgeable, who
good researchers in our audience. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to just take a quick look myself and see if I can find anything.
And Fanny Bolton too. Be interesting to check with her. Was she a bit of a lesser in the hierarchy of Ellen's favourites? Was Fanny down the list a little bit than
Marion Davis actually died? It says here in the Adventist SDA Encyclopedia that she died in 1904. Interesting.
Right. So a good 11 years before Ellen.
11. That's right. Interesting. So,
when was Desire of Ages released?
That's another good question. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can certainly get it quickly enough.
Now, while you're checking there, we'll just give a little plug for Steve Daly's book. Tim Humphreys writes. Steve Daly's book goes into quite a bit of detail there. with some of the things we're talking about, particularly with Enright in the latest book.
I'm of the impression but it's only an impression that Desire of Ages may have died about the same time, or finished about the same time that Marion passed on, but that is not
too sure.
Not certain by any means. And I'm not sitting close to a copy of Desire of Ages, so, but I will.
I'm just giving some plugs for the channel while you're researching. Good. So that's all right. QR code there helps make a donation. That really helps me be able to continue with this channel. And if people want to go and listen to some of the music I've done, particularly an album called Standing at the Cross, you can go to Spotify, and if you scan that, it'll take you to the whole album. Oh, just another quick bit of news flash. So we're going live to Instagram, but also now season 1 on the podcast platform, only available on the podcast, is now, as of last night, going to Spotify as a platform as well, which is the biggest podcast platform in the world. So I'm hoping
Peter, the answer is 1898 was when Desire of Ages was first published.
1898. Yeah, yes. Okay. So she was, it may have been one of her last big works that she helped with, Marion Davis.
The last, probably, yes. The last, I think, well, Patriarchs and Prophets and Kings, I think, was posthumous, I believe.
Yes.
And Great Controversy, was there a 1911 version? Of course, there was a rewrite of an earlier version. So, right,
yeah.
But I just thinking,
had some credits given to various
historians, and at least it had quote marks. I don't know, and this is very unscientific and really not founded on much other than my gut impression. But as I think back of various readings I've done of Desire of Ages and Great Controversy, I think the writing in the Desire of Ages flows better, is better quality than the writing in Great Controversy.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I agree.
Yes, it just flows much better, is more compelling. Though I don't know, the close of probation is pretty compelling, Peter.
Yes. It's almost like two different authors if you read Great Controversy and you read the Desire of Ages. Interesting, in the Trenchard book, at the beginning there, several notable people are writing comments. Larry Geraghty, Ron Rockwell, Denny Fortin, 3 of my favorite people to interview were involved with that. And it only just came out. I for some reason, I thought it was out like 5 or 6 years ago, but
yeah,
it's just very recent.
Right. Earlier this year, wasn't it?
Yes, 2023. It said on the thing.
Yeah, first edition, June of 2023. Yeah. I mean, we are really close to that.
Yeah.
Yes, I thought it was interesting. Denny Fortin said that this is Larry Geraghty said no expositor of Ellen White can ignore this tool.
Yeah.
And Denny Fortin was very complimentary of it as well. Of all the people that I have seen give presentations online, he's been on, and Fortin's been on Adventist Today Sabbath seminar a few times. He seems to me to be, I don't want to criticize anybody else by saying this, but he seems more forthright and just straight. I mean, he'll tell it to you straight, and
yeah, it's funny.
It's refreshing.
I did an interview with him, Matthew Cortman, Ron Grable, on the Ellen White's use of the apocryphal works, and Denny was just sitting there quietly, quiet. Other people saying stuff, boom, 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 and then all of a sudden, bish, do, and he just says these incredibly profound things in like 30 seconds, and then he's quiet again. And it's worth watching that interview. He is just like a surgeon.
Yes, I saw that interview. That was very interesting one. Very interesting. So,
We've got here, someone said that Marion died at age 57 at only 57 pounds or something like that. It's disappeared off the... Jim Wagner's joined us. Ellen read in the very... I'll bring up what Jim has said here. I said we wouldn't do this. I can't believe I am. But we're preambling. We're just about to start properly. Ellen read in the very early morning, around 2 a.m. The literary assistants took the excerpts Ellen had written those mornings into these scrapbooks. So I'd like to see the topic of those folders. That's an interesting thing. Yeah.
I see in this Adventist encyclopedia, it says in May of 1903, while attending the general conference held in Oakland, California, Marion Davis visited the Chabot Observatory and caught a severe cold, which settled in her lungs. And but she got better in the autumn and into the winter and spring, and then she had a relapse in the summer of 04, contracted tuberculosis, which steadily drained her strength until she died on October 25, 1904. You know, I can't help but think, and this is a little snarky, and I may apologize in advance for saying it, but when I was reading J.N. Andrews' books, the J.N. Andrews biography by Gil Valentine, one of the things that struck me is how many people were dropping of tuberculosis. I mean, it was just a scourge. J.N. Andrews' wife died of it, his daughter died of it, and he ended up dying of it, and a number of people around Ellen White died of it. And actually, I think Gil Valentine mentions in his book, it's a shame that the Holy Spirit didn't see fit to tell her how we could avoid tuberculosis and how we could stop tuberculosis. Instead, the Holy Spirit apparently thought it was more important to warn that masturbation causes insanity.
Yeah, solitary vice.
Yeah.
Instead of giving her accurate and relevant information on tuberculosis, let's give her something that's actually not even true.
Yeah, right.
Let's give her untrue medical advice. Like that little conversation that we just had there, that put so many nails in the coffin in my mind.
Yeah, and it's too bad. She did well. That's what betrayed the fact that it was just picking and choosing from the milieu around her, what she thought was the best sources she could choose from, and that those sources were where she was getting it from, and not from God.
Exactly. Such a current held view of the day, you know, solitary vice causes insanity.
Yeah, and tea. She said that tea was a poison. Well, that's certainly hasn't stood the test of time.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yes. So keep the comments open on my side, just in case Jim says things, because Jim was kind of involved around back in the day there. So I'll bring up stuff, Jim, if you're watching. If you say stuff, we'll bring it online. And Jim,
I've got a question for Jim, and I think he may know the answer to this and know where to find it, because I couldn't find it. Jim, I recall seeing a letter that I think it was Roger Olson, somebody in the White Estate, wrote to someone else who was involved, suggesting that they thought that if Jim Cox was the person doing the research, that they would better be able, I think they even used the word control. They later said they didn't mean control in the sense of forcing him into doing something, but there was a comment like that in a letter, and I have seen it and I cannot find it. And so if you know where it's at, Jim, or can direct us and point us in the right direction, or even supply the letter, that would be great.
Yeah. And Dale, just another shameless plug, Dale has asked if the coffee mugs are still for sale. Yes, they are. They were selling so well. I initially was going to stop selling them, but they were selling so well, I've done another run. So I've got 30. And I'll also, Matthew's watching again. Great to have you, Matthew. Matthew and Jim will bring up your comments. Well, Jesus didn't cure cancer either, but your point about the solitary vice is well taken.
Well, which brings...
Maybe Jesus did cure cancer. Didn't he do some healing?
Yeah, how many people around him, Matthew, died of cancer? So maybe, you know, there's some sort of preventative
they touched his robe.
Yeah. I heard one snarky atheist commentator say that if and I'll speak as though it's myself, if I announced to the or demonstrated to the world that I had found a cure for cancer, and then demonstrated it on, say, 10 people or maybe 20 people, and then there would be an outcry for people to say, make this available to the masses. What would people think of me if I said, no, I've made my point? That's enough. You can draw any any inferences from that you choose. Jim says he does not know about the Cox reference. So anyway.
Now, Jim did send me some stuff this morning, but because I literally only got home 5 minutes before the show, I might try and bring that up.
Good.
I'll do that now, Jim, while we continue on.
Well, contemporaneous letters between Jim and Veltman would be most interesting. I know that in Veltman's report, he thanked in the opening, among others, Walter Ray for sharing things with him, and he even thanked Robert Brinsmead. But there were a large number of people. It wasn't just them, but there was a group of several, and he named both of them and thanked them for sharing materials. So I thought, despite the fact that Veltman was a true believer, and it's clear in various things he says, he also was a true scholar, and he tried to put on that hat and did his best to do it. And I think he did a pretty good job of it. Yeah. So he doesn't hide where he's coming from, and that's to his credit. All of us come to everything in life with certain amount of presuppositions.
Yes.
And that controls where we go with our beliefs and with our approach to any problem, with any issue.
Now, there's a letter here that James wrote to Dr. Fred Veltman, 7-page letter there. I think I've got that right, Jim. Jim wrote on, and again, I don't know if I'm going to have much luck getting it up onto the screen. And then there's the reply from Fred Veltman back to Jim. I'm just double checking and that is from Fred. So that would be worth trying to get up onto the screen maybe and having a little look at. I'll just see if I can do that. Thanks for that, Jim, for sending that through. And we'll definitely add that, by the way, if you go to SDAQ&A.wordpress.com. A lot of Jim stuff we're putting there. So I'll definitely add that there if we can't get it up on the show today.
Yes, here I'm looking at the preface, Veltman's preface, and he said, actually, the list is shorter than I thought. He says, several individuals allowed me to use materials from their own publications, notably Walter Ray and Robert Brinsmead. I think also of Keith Anderson and Richard Rockwell, who helped with the random selection of the 15 chapters, and then he goes on. But he thanked two people in particular for sharing materials with him, and that was Walter Ray and Robert Brinsmead. So very interesting. And I assume Jim knows a bit about that, quite a bit about that what Walter may have done with Fred Veltman.
I do. I have been able to bring that up.
Good.
We can come back to that if you want to. That's the to Fred from Jim, and then there's the one from Fred back. So
there's where Jim sounds like the conduit, that he was the one, the messenger, or was he a prophet? I'm not sure. He may have been more than what a prophet suggests. But anyway, yes, it sounds like he was the one who was sending on the material.
Yeah. So what I will do, Jim, and those watching, because it is quite a long document, we won't read it necessarily today unless you'd like to refer to it, Arthur, at some point. But I will add that. I'll get Stephen Beagles to add that to our website, which I think is sdaqa.wordpress.com.
Do you have materials posted on that website now? The last time I looked, which was some weeks ago,
There's
it was
only
just
one. There's only one thing, and hopefully after today's interview, I'm sending a bunch more to Stephen Beagles to upload there. So very soon there will be lots of material there.
While we're kind of in a little pause here, let me reference chapter 84 of the Desire of Ages, which was the last of the 15 chapters that Veltman studied. And he talked, remember we had talked before about Veltman used sentences as the basic unit of comparison, not phrases, but sentences. And there are 137 sentences. What's interesting, he says, we classified the 137 sentences, 138 units. I'm a little confused there. If the sentence, but anyway, 137, 138 of that chapter, 5 sentences were verbatim, 25 were strict paraphrase, 39 were simple paraphrase, 2 were loose paraphrase, 7 were Bible sourced, 17 partial independence, and then 28 were strict independence. So that was a chapter that was pretty heavily dependent upon others. Most literary parallels involved Hannah, he said 61, and 34 involved March. And March, I think there were 2 books. One was Night Scenes from the Bible. I have a copy of that somewhere. And I don't remember what the other book was. So at any rate, that's interesting. So that was pretty high number of parallels and borrowing.
And interesting, I think Robert Lindbeck in one of the messages I read earlier is pointing out, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, Robert, that if you're using a sentence, so in that one sentence, there might have been several indications of borrowing, or a shorter sentence might have one, but they both had the same value. So you might have a long sentence that showed verbatim microcopying 3 times, and one sentence that copied it 1 time, but they both got the value of just 1 each.
I've at times, and I think I would guess a lot of people have, when I've read a book, will maybe copy something down from the book. In the Kindle, you can highlight it, and then you can go to your highlight to the section where they have a list of all those things you've highlighted, and you can look at them. And those are usually just those are word for word. And I had one time I did a book review with a small group that I used to meet with. Well, every Sunday we'd get together and have discussions about various things. And I did a book report on this one particular book, and I used those notes, which were word for word, copies, and made my report using those. Well, probably the big difference was I didn't claim that my report was inspired.
That's exactly right.
But I certainly depended upon the verbatim material, and I didn't always read them verbatim. I often paraphrased them when I was sharing the materials with them.
Yes.
But again,
and to me, he's got 2 paraphrasing ways of analyzing it as well. What are they again? There's
okay. There, let me find that. He had several different categories. They had verbatim,
yeah,
strict paraphrase,
yeah,
simple paraphrase, loose paraphrase.
That's right.
And then he had source Bible, and then he had partial independence, and then strict independence, and then independent Bible quotations.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in the percentage of the verbatim and the first 2 the strict paraphrase, or whatever they were, the loose paraphrase. I wonder what percentage of the 15 chapters would be considered borrowed if you counted the verbatim and those 2 first levels of paraphrase.
When you look at his conclusions, he rates we had an average system, a numbering system, in which he kind of conflated all these together. I mean, he would kind of did a median or average or whatever, and he had a fairly low number, as I recall.
Right.
I had a hard time following that, the way he got to that number. And that probably is more a comment on my inability to figure it out than his lack of clarity.
Well, I don't know. I think, like Robert Lindbeck had pointed out, that first little, I'll just read that first little paragraph that Veltman had put: the writings which form the subject matter of this research project are those of a special author, a prophetic personality. And I think that gave him such a bias that affected his mathematical calculation as well. I'll just quickly bring up Jim, just comments on those letters. That is exactly right. The first letter is the cover to material Walter sent to Fred. And by the way, those watching, Jim was Walter Ray's
lawyer,
friend and eventually lawyer as well, and was very involved with a lot of the material that was back and forth to Fred Veltman and to various committees. You will see references in the letter to the position paper in Glendale and to the article I submitted. And he then just went on to say, the next to last page I sent you is Fred to me. He says, as usual, your questions are quite specific and quite demanding.
Do I sense a bit of irritation there? Jim was holding his feet to the fire.
I can't wait to read those two letters. And Matthew has just said, Jim, would you mind if you or Peter sends me a copy of that material? I've just emailed it to you there, Matthew. Just check your inbox. Okay, let's get into
it. You're good at multitasking.
It's the musician thing.
Yeah, that's it. I just opened a page and opened the book, and I see here in one chapter that they're talking about here that in a major addition, it says, Ellen White presented the thoughts of Caiaphas when Jesus confesses his identity. And it says, in these sentences, Marion Davis selected material from manuscript 102, although a few places may reflect Hannah. As I recall, I don't think the Bible gives too much, the gospel accounts give very much of the actual thoughts of the players, but that's one of the things Ellen White did, was she, in many places, gave their thoughts. Yeah. And now I'm really jumping back to another issue, and that is one of the things where Ellen White agrees with John Milton about the fall, Paradise Lost, is she and Milton agree on some of the thoughts that Ellen was having, which Ruth Bergeson thought was suggestive that God had inspired them both. But anyway, there might be another explanation.
Yes, yeah. But that is something that I think people love about the Desire of Ages. Like, they're getting inside the characters' heads more than the gospel itself reveals. Do you think that was an Ellen trick, or was that a Marion Davis? Hey, here's a nice little trick. I'm going to get people inside their heads. And did she add that component, or was Ellen herself in her journaling saying, and this is what Jesus said? Because I know when she talks about the devil, the Lucifer, after the fall and all the bad stuff starts happening, he's in heaven and he sees an angel walk by, and this is Ellen White recounting, and he says, look, to the angel, take me to your lead, take me to God. I've got a few things to say. Take me to your leader. And he says, look, I'm really sorry, please forgive me. And those that want this reference, I've got it on my phone if you're after it. And Jesus or God says, no, sorry, you're too late. That never happened, but it's an example of Ellen getting in someone's mind and telling you what they were thinking. So that indicates that maybe it is a technique of hers and not Marion's.
Well, it's hard to say, because remember from yesterday, I quoted a place where Veltman said that when he looked through this very large collection of books that were part of the genre of 19th century writings about the life of Christ, he said it was eerie. It was kind of eerie, yes, seeing the similarities between those books and the Desire of Ages, because Adventists those of us who were reared as Adventists thought Desire of Ages was this unique piece of literature that there was nothing else like it in the world or in history.
Yeah.
Turns out there was a lot of things like it.
Yeah.
And Veltman suggests in this one place where there's thoughts of Caiaphas, he says, well, there were bits of Hannah there.
Yes.
So
Hannah was also getting into the character's mind and what they were thinking as well.
Exactly.
So she's copying a technique of the day.
Yes. And of course, the good novel, which hopefully none of us read because we were trained not to when we were growing up, and that, but the good novel gets into the person's head and shares that with you.
Yeah.
And that's what can make a good novel very captivating or very good.
Right. Yeah. I remember when I left the Adventist church and went to the Gospels and read them without that filter, I realized that most of my gospel training had been from reading Ellen White stuff.
Yes.
And it was a bit boring to start with. But then it got better.
Well, there are all kinds of filters that we read everything with. And some of the things, well, and that can be true if you just take off your Adventist filter and read parts of the Bible or read the Bible, and you see things that you never recognized before. And sometimes if you'll just read one of the Gospels, Mark, for instance, and just read Mark for a month, and then go read John, and tell me if you think that's the same person they're writing about. No, it doesn't. You're because when we read any of those books, we in our minds knit those stories together with the stories that are on the other Gospels as though they were all one story.
Exactly.
And they're not written like that.
Yeah.
I'll refrain from saying whether or not they're really different stories, but they're not written as the same story. They're written as different stories.
Yeah.
Because, like, for instance, in the book of Mark, and I'm going well astray now, in the book of Mark, if I remember correctly, the disciples can never really figure out what's going on.
No.
They don't know who Jesus really is. They're dumbfounded. And but in the Gospel of John, he's telling them everything. He's laying it all out. There's no secrets, nothing hidden. He tells it all to them instead of telling things in parables that are hard to understand. But anyway, back to Veltman.
Yes.
But I'm just commenting on the filters that we read with.
Yeah,
it's hard.
I think the little sidetracks are important because they inform why this is such an important topic and why people have struggle with it.
And their experiences that because most of the people who are tuning into this, it's not a podcast, this YouTube channel and Instagram channel and Facebook channel, people who are tuning into this, most of us have a similar background and have experienced using the similar filters. And various people, I see comments from various people, and various people have shed some of those filters, but they all started with the same set. And so it's interesting. We find these things fascinating.
That's right.
Just jumping around again, I'm just opened a chapter, The Desire of Ages, chapter 46, which was one of the 15 that he reviewed. He says, in addition to March, the works of 6 other authors are represented in chapter 46: Hannah, Fleetwood, Jones, Melville, Cumming, and Nickel. I'll say this for her. She was much better read than I am. She used a lot of material. He says she used a literary source for 38 of the 89 sentences of that chapter. 39 of the 89, she used a literary source. Strict paraphrase, 15. He didn't have any verbatim here. Strict paraphrase, 15. Simple paraphrase, 11. Partial independence, 8. Verbatim. Oh, there's verbatim. Verbatim, 2. He's listing them in order of usage. And loose paraphrase, 2. So it's interesting. They vary substantially in how much usage there is from chapter to chapter.
And
which
it's
again, I think
chapters of 85.
I'm saying again.
And it's only 15 chapters of 85. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think what it tells us a lot about what Ellen White was reading and what she filled her scrapbooks with. And so if she wasn't reading chapters about a certain thing in some of these books, then when Marion Davis is collecting articles, she's not encountering material to borrow from or to take from her scrapbooks that are related to these books.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So I see Matthew was impressed as well by your multitasking abilities and how quick you are.
He's having a dig at me though.
So.
He often asks for things and they don't come.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to bounce around a little bit more. In chapter 24 of the Desire of Ages, which is not this the carpenter's son? He says there are 153 sentences in that chapter, and 112 were designated as strict independence. Bible quotations were 9, but the remaining 32 sentences exhibited some degree of dependence on a literary source. Simple paraphrase 10, partial independence 9, loose paraphrase 8, source Bible 3, strict paraphrase 1, and verbatim 1. But whatever happens, my recollection as I went through this book, I don't recall any where it didn't have any, where there were no parallels. And you also, I think one also has to realize, so they did know what books she had in her library, that when you have a finite set of books and you're not sure that those are the only books she referred to, there's a fairly good chance, but there could be others. Doing this kind of work is a little bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's hard. When I sit here and look through the White Lie and look through Walter Ray's comparisons where he shows the dependence, there are times when I say, I don't see that. And then I'll look back at it 10 minutes later and say, oh yeah, okay, there it is. But that's hard work. Yeah. And I think in order to be able to find that kind of material, you have to be intimately familiar with the material.
Yeah, you have to be immersed.
Yes, Ellen White, and that's why Walter Ray.
That's right.
That's why Walter Ray was so good at it, is because he had been such an Ellen White groupie.
Yeah. He'd certainly immersed himself in it, and I think the story goes, and Jim can tell me if I'm wrong, that he came across a list, I think that Arthur White might have put up somewhere about all the books that were in her library when she died. And so he was like, oh, cool, I want to know everything about, Ellen G. Presley. And so he found out the books and he starts reading them and he goes, hang on a second. No. This book by Hannah, that's a lot like The Desire of Ages.
Yeah. And that's right. I see My Father's Business said that Ellen White copied a lot from the Pioneers' writings too, and wondered if that's plagiarism. We haven't been using that word very much. We've used it a little bit, and probably because it's a legal term and it gets wrapped up in copyright law and such. But if you're borrowing from other people's writings, regardless of whether they're your compatriots or your husband or a published author, it's still literary dependence. And Ellen White, as Veltman says, that is very reluctant and very reluctant to admit any use of other people's words, and minimized it. So
yeah, that's the point, isn't it? That
yes,
if whether it's verbatim or not, there was an overextended use of paraphrasing, and the claim that it came from God, and B, the realization that they needed to cover it up. Yeah, there's problems with that.
Yeah, and anytime anybody raised their head and said anything about it, they got knocked down pretty fast. And I think people were reluctant to step forward and say anything like that, and probably a lot of people just weren't aware of it. But those that were aware of it and talked about it were pretty well ostracized, or in the case of Fanny Bolton, was vilified. And so any rate,
it's interesting. Deanna has written, "We were so naive," and the interesting thing that Adventist, the movement with the leadership and the suppression, is they kind of sheepify everybody to be little lambs that just follow along. They almost cultivate that naivety within the membership. And I know leaving the church, one of the struggles was finding my own identity again, but also dealing more with the world. I was just so naive.
And my father's business makes the point that the pioneers didn't mind one bit. Not so sure they didn't mind. I think they were probably cowed a bit. But if it was less than 10%, then it isn't she right that it was not overextended? I don't think one can say that it was less than 10%. And he says you showed no instances where she copied anything and made claims of revision. I disagree with that. In fact, she says very clearly that she saw all of this stuff. Basically, it's what she wrote was what God showed her in the dreams of the night and in visions, and then she wrote it down. Having said that as well, and that's not part of this study, a Veltman study, but there are authors, and I think Walter Ray may be one of them, who have shown that there were testimonies that where she said she was shown, and then she quotes from somebody else without any kind of quotation marks or anything else, but is using the words of other people to say what God told her in vision. That they're out there; those are there. And
I think what Emmanuel is saying is that we're not producing it; we're just talking about it. He's saying he wanted.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, for example, when she talks about solitary vice, she definitely says that she was shown, but science shows that she was wrong. So there's an example. And if you want me, Emmanuel, to go and find that, I can look it up. But what do you say about that? If we are right, and these are claims that she was shown by God, and she was wrong. For example, what's the famous American dress thing she had where she said that God had shown her that all Adventist women should be wearing this dress she designed with the little panty looms?
Yeah.
God had shown her. She pushed. So, yeah, eventually that disappeared. But what,
Yeah, it flopped. It was a flop. It didn't catch on. And sometimes you just have to cut your losses and move on. And that's, I believe that Steve Daly claims, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I think Steve Daly claims that she was selling patterns. Someplace I read recently. Yeah, she was selling patterns. So she was making a little bit of money, or hoped to make a little bit of money out of that. There was another thing I ran across here that's kind of interesting, where Veltman mentions that some of these, and we've already talked about, that some of these authors that she was dependent on would even say what Jesus was thinking, and that Ellen White tended, when she was copying from these people or using what they said about what Christ was thinking, that she would say, Christ virtually says, so he's by saying virtually says, you shouldn't do that, instead of saying Christ said you shouldn't. I'm not saying that very well, but she's saying that she didn't like using quotes of what Jesus said when somebody else said he said it, or what he thought, I should say.
That's right. Yeah.
So.
And Emmanuel says something about secret vice. Isn't it solitary vice, the masturbation one? I thought it was solitary vice. Yeah.
Well, I think it's about.
And what do you mean, Emmanuel saying, was that copied from someone?
Oh, that was not an unusual notion at that time. Yeah. I know, I've read that.
I'm pretty sure she copied it from that guy. He had a nice retreat center, one of those water therapy places. I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
It's in Ron Number's book. It's in Prophetic Health. Yeah.
That's right.
Emmanuel, I'm not sure you've read some of this stuff. Go and read Prophetess of Health. That's probably one of the best books as far as providing lots of evidence for these things.
Yeah.
And Kevin Morgan is saying it's secret vice. Maybe, but I've definitely read it as solitary vice. But maybe there's both. But either way, it's masturbation is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
God told her that it's causes mental health.
And it caused a lot of other things too, as I recall, having read, I think it was in A Solemn Appeal to Mothers, I think.
Yes.
There are other things it caused. It's quite a long list. It's quite a long list. Almost everything is caused by that. So we may have discovered the cure to a lot of things. It just could be had simply by.
Emmanuel says it's been proven that right by science. So show us the paper. You're making that claim now, Emmanuel. You've got the burden of proof.
Yes. Yeah, you've been asking us to prove things.
Yeah.
Though I think that Peter's planning to put a lot of things up on the website, and I'll supply some things to you as well. And you may already have it, but I clipped off of, I borrowed, but I'm going to do it with attribution. I took a screenshot of a piece of the Review and Herald from back in early in the church's history, where Uriah Smith is bitterly complaining about people using, their materials. It might have been James White, but anyway, on the front page of the Review and Herald, they were very upset that people were copying their materials and not giving credit for it. And so this wasn't the standards were different, no question, but it didn't mean that people didn't get really angry. I've trying to recall, there's one of the famous writers or poets from Roman times, and I want to say Cicero. It may have been, that doesn't seem quite right. There's some famous writing of his where he bitterly complains about people using his stuff, stealing his stuff and putting it out there. This is not the newest concept around.
That's right. And Kevin talks about zinc deficiency, and the zinc, like the life force energy that we're referring to, zinc is not just in that part of the body. Zinc is in the body. And anyway, show us some peer review articles, and that'll prove everything right and we are wrong. And Ellen, there's nothing to see here. Fred's 8-year study proved nothing.
Somebody's saying that it proved nothing?
I know, that's me.
Oh, that you? Oh, I get it. Okay, sorry. A little slow on the uptake.
Confirm, prove to us that
secret vice really does.
Vice causes massive zinc deficiency, which leads to all sorts of mental problems. And we will then go, no worries, you are correct. Fred Veltman's findings mean nothing. Back to Fred. What's this? Matthew's just written, this article is an interesting background on borrowing versus plagiarism in ancient world. Are you going to share a link for us there, Matthew? That'd be good. Okay, back to Fred.
Okay. I'll just, I don't remember if I know I shared this where, well, one of the things they talk about here in one of their summaries is how one of the chapters largely revised the Spirit of Prophecy account. Ellen White had written some books earlier that I think they called the Spirit of Prophecy multi-volume set, and they needed their letters from Ellen White. Yes, it's called the Spirit of Prophecy. Letters from Ellen White where she said they really badly needed to update it. And one of the reasons was to try to get a good Life of Christ into one volume that could be sold by the colporteurs, get it out in the public. And so in this one chapter, they talk about the Desire of Ages text largely revised the Spirit of Prophecy account. So this and its expansion in this one chapter reflects the use of Hannah and Jones. And so again, what I mentioned before, Ellen White would copy these things, and Veltman says it's clear to him, and his study shows it's clear that Ellen White was the one doing the copying from these other sources.
Yes.
So she would copy it into the scrapbook. It got taken out of the scrapbook and put into the Spirit of Prophecy with some revisions, and then it's taken and put into the Desire of Ages, and there's more editing and revisions made, and again you lose this. You lose the clear. It's not quite as obvious. It's sort of like if you now younger people, but most of the people won't understand this very well. But most of the people here are probably a little older, and they'll understand this. If I were to fax you a document, and then you sign it and fax it back to me, and then I make some notes on it and fax it back to you, it starts degrading. And sometimes it gets to a point where you might not be able to tell.
So
it's like and if you make a lot of changes to the document, and I type up a new document, it might be hard to tell that it's a copy with some changes of the original document. Depends on how many changes you made. Doesn't change the fact that it had its beginning from something I wrote, and then Peter ends up writing it and putting it out there, and it may not be readily obvious it was initially my work.
Exactly. Yeah. People seem to think that this kind of borrowing has to be verbatim for it to be a bad thing. But what we're seeing here is a consistent theme of paraphrasing, using other people's ideas to collate the structure and very framework of these books. Not God, but human influence collated together.
Kevin makes a point, and that's the source he's talking about, that I was talking about. Review and Herald, September 6, 1864, Uriah Smith about the plagiarism of Annie R. Smith. Turned out to be a mistake, and Uriah noted. But that's not the real point. It turns out to be a mistake that they were copying Annie, but he was mad because he thought they were, even if they weren't. Yeah. And so the point remains that it's made him angry, and he made it clear, you're not to do this. Exactly. Turns out he was wrong that they had done it, but it doesn't change the point that it was wrong, and he knew it, and he wanted to make sure they realized it too.
Exactly.
But I appreciate the point that he's right about where it came from. I almost said it was about Annie, but I couldn't quite think of her name. So Kevin's a better historian.
Emmanuel said, "You guys, hang on, where's this gone?"
Maybe it wasn't a mistake.
You guys said she copied visions. Show no examples, then talk about masturbation. What's happening here? We didn't say she copied visions. We said that she said her visions are copied. She's saying I was shown. She was saying I was shown in vision things that she actually copied from other things. And there are plenty of examples of that.
And those are going to appear in the future on Peter's website.
We'll put them in the resources. Or unless someone's in the, we just don't have our hands on that, but if someone's in the feed comments, just put some links in there for us.
And here's the problem.
We're saying that she claimed that this stuff came from God, but it didn't come from God, is what we're saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I laughed because I saw what Matthew just posted.
What did he say?
Kind of a variation of the old drinking game.
My father's business donates $1 every time he gets paid the same. I've always used the word solitary vice, but because they said it's secret vice, I'm having to clarify it. From here on in, we're just going to call it SV.
Here's the point, though, that what this all comes back to, and it's what we started with tonight, and that is the reason. Well, Adventists will always say, and there would probably be no shortage of them in the comments who would say that and I've heard. I watched the John Ankerberg thing with show with Bill Johnson and Walter Martin just in the last few days. I think somebody had given us you may have given us the link to, but anyway, Adventists will always come back and say we get all of our doctrines from the Bible, not from Ellen White. So I wonder why it is so shaking when somebody points out flaws in Ellen White, and that Ellen White's claims may not be all verifiable and may be verifiably incorrect about where she got her material. If if none of your doctrines depend upon Ellen White, don't worry about it. Shake it off. Doesn't matter. Just go back and rest on what you know you can prove out of the Bible. And I suspect that one of the reasons that there's so much defensiveness is because that statement that all the beliefs come from the Bible and don't have anything to do with Ellen White really isn't true. And the 1844 investigative judgment doctrine is one of them. That without Ellen White, that's why that goes down, and that's why it was either lose that doctrine or lose Desmond Ford. And for the corporatists who run the church, that was an easy decision.
Emmanuel says, what if God confirmed what she may have read somewhere else? So you're saying that she read it and God said, hey, Ellen, that's really special. Write that down. That doesn't seem to be what happened. Is she would have a vision. I'm not questioning that she didn't have, I don't think it was from God, but she's had these impressions that seem to be quite powerful. But they were usually after they were kind of subconscious, like confirmations. As I said yesterday, she had lots of confirmative visions, but no predictive visions.
And the question is asked, Kevin asks a fair question, and that is it legitimate to adapt a well thought out well-worded thought gem to nail down a thought you want to express? I think it is okay to do that, and I'm not saying it's not. Where the problem is when I write and when I do that, and then I say, these words are mine. These are mine. And I'm expressing you what God showed me, and not one word. She was very clear about that it wasn't borrowed from anybody else. And if she had said exactly what you wrote, that I saw this and boy, it fit perfectly, so here's what it is. That's fine. But that's what we talked about earlier. I think there's a question of honesty. And that's my problem. And this is one.
Actually say that, and I think you read earlier, right at the start, one of your opening paragraphs or things that you read to us was her saying that this is shown to me. I didn't get this from elsewhere. Maybe yes. Kevin wasn't watching. He would have heard that quote for sure, though.
Yeah. There is I had pulled it up earlier and then I lost it. There's a well-known quote from Ellen White about the one of the world is men who will stand, for the truth though the heavens fall, and I'm butchering it. It's much better than that. One of Ellen White's most famous quotes, and it turns out she borrowed that from somebody. That was one of the quotes that was held up to me when I was a kid, saying, look at this beautiful, beautiful comment that Ellen White made. How could a third grade woman with a third grade education write something so beautiful unless God is helping her? Well,
yeah.
So,
can you read what you read at the start? Have you got that in front of you?
Yes. Just a minute. It will take me a moment to find it.
Because
which one about not one heretical sentence?
Yeah, and she said, these things shown to me.
Here she said, this is letter 329A from 1905. I am now looking over my diaries and copies of letters written for several years back. I have the most precious matter to reproduce and place before the people in testimony form. While I am able to do this work, the people must have things to revive past history, that they may see that there is one straight chain of truth, without one heretical sentence in that which I have written. This, I am instructed, is to be a living letter to all in regard to my faith. I'm trying to think if you can think of any theologian or any person in history who was a religious figure who made not one heretical sentence or statement in their entire career. That is something. That is something.
And so Kevin, you've said, not Kevin, Emmanuel, you've said, show me where she said that. We just showed you. And Kevin has said, did you read it in context?
Well,
Your
look
thoughts?
it up. This did have a couple of ellipses in it in one place. I don't think it took out anything all that. It didn't change the meaning of the rest of this. The letter 329A, 1905. Letter 329A, 1905. You can find it in the White Estate, whiteestate.org. It's a great website. It's a tremendous resource in what you can find there. For instance, when we were talking last night about the letter to J.N. Andrews that she wrote to him in March of the year of 1883, I think, the year he died. Gil Valentine thinks that, well, the gentleman who delivered it got to Europe in late July, and Valentine thinks it was probably in early August that this was it. Whitney read the letter to J.N. Andrews, and one of the things that I found, it was, if I can find that, oh yes, I have it here in my Kindle. There were some gentlemen who had some comments about the about what opining on the kind of things that were said in the letter, and you can take parts of the letter and say it wasn't that bad. Here it is. My Kindle fell on the floor, and I have that here. But Grady Smoot, who was a former president of Andrews University, he read that letter as, he said, it was the most severe rebuke that Ellen White ever wrote to her colleague, J.N. Andrews. And Andrews, remember, was dying. He died in October, and it was obvious that he was dying. Daniel Augsburger, who is a historian, and was, I looked him up because I didn't know who he was. And he had been at Andrews. And he said that she scolded Andrews severely. This is a man dying. Pietro Copez, and I'm probably saying that wrong, who was another man who taught in France and at Andrews, notes that for later readers who knew Andrews was on his deathbed, the language may appear, quote, unnecessarily harsh, almost pitiless. With friends like that, who needs enemies? I hope that if you find someday, Peter, that I'm on my deathbed, you don't write me a letter telling me all my faults and telling me where I failed in life.
Yeah, pitiful.
And I think you said, a good friend writes and kind of builds you up and says good things about you. It's kind of like at a funeral. You don't say bad things about the deceased. And it's even worse when you're alive.
Back to that statement you read before from Ellen, Kevin is saying, yes, but she doesn't say she didn't use sources. And
that sentence doesn't say it.
No. And then Emmanuel says, can you read more? Because that is not what she said. And then he says, and now I know, Emmanuel, that you're trolling us. You said, please say the reference one more time. You're just trying to distract us. So we're going to get back to Fred.
This will be on YouTube, and you can go back and play it, and you'll find the spot that it says letter 329A, 1905.
Yeah. So we're not going to get lost in the leaves there. We're looking at a big picture here. And Emmanuel, if you take the time to read that book by Trenchard, you're going to find some information there that I promise you won't shake you, because you already have Ellen White on a pedestal and she's not coming down anytime soon. But go and read it anyway.
No, they're determined to keep her on that pedestal. And the problem is, once you go down a certain path, it's almost impossible to backtrack, because you've sold a certain idea, and once you sold that idea, you become so heavily identified with it that you take it back and you're done for. And it's like the quote I gave from Robertson's The White Truth that says, what the church is a reflection, what we are as a church is a reflection of our faith in the divine authority evident in the writings of Ellen G. White. And the Review and Herald said, take out the testimonies. There's no logical stopping place till all the special truths of the message are gone. Nothing is surer than this, that this message and the visions belong together and stand or fall together. So how can you back away? You're stuck.
Yeah.
And so you have to come up with excuses, and you have to say things like, well, you're not reading it in context. Or she didn't say, well, Kevin, and I respect Kevin. I think he's a great apologist. He says, well, she was writing to her granddaughter about material. Well, it doesn't change what she said. I don't think she was saying I didn't write one heretical statement about linen throughout my life that I put in the testimonies, or about a muslin. She was talking about the testimonies, and that she didn't write one heretical statement, period. End of story.
Yeah.
So
back to more Veltman findings.
Okay. I will I'll do what there are times in my life and in my youth where I would open the Bible and find a spot and find truth.
Kevin, before we dive back in development, Kevin has said, so where is the statement that says she didn't ever use sources? So that's the kind of rabbit hole you get pinned down to. We're not claiming that she said, I've never used sources in that kind of specific sense. But there is a general overtone perpetuated by the church, by the leaders, by fans in the pew, by Ellen White herself, that perpetuate this notion of visions coming down and her disseminating the information to the public. And here's, the mythologizing of it all.
When in the introduction to Veltman's report, and I think I shared this last night, but in case I didn't, it says, beyond the question of how Ellen White employed literary sources, especially regarding the role of visions, there was the issue of extent. Whenever the officers of the White estate, as well as Nickel and Jemison, conceded Ellen White's literary indebtedness, they minimized its extent. And they always did. I mean, that was just such a small amount. It just, she saw a phrase that she liked the turn of it, and it's all God's truth. And so she just, on rare occasions, she did this. But it turns out she did it a lot, and she did use those things as a major source, and she used it far more extensively. Even the White estate said that she used literary sources far more extensively than we ever realized.
Yeah, then the claim, like Kevin has just said, she specifically says that she did use sources. Okay.
No.
Well, where did she say that, Kevin?
Yes.
Give us the quote where she says that.
Other than the great controversy where she said, in certain places where historians have set forth established, facts, we have done this, and this time we put quotes around them.
Yeah.
Unlike
the 1911 version.
There it is. Great controversy. Now, that's talking about historians.
You predicted that.
Yeah.
You have the gift of prophecy.
Yes, I do. I do. It came to me last night in a dream. So Emmanuel, I'm not going to bring your stuff up for the rest of this interview. We're going to have a chat with you tomorrow, which I'm very much looking forward to. You guys are literally speaking for hours and cannot prove that she made the statement. Come on, brothers. If she said she did not and you prove she did, then you both make a serious point. I'm just not even sure what that is. So. And I'm not sure that Peter and I are even saying that. We're saying this is what Veltman said. And Veltman did a study. Veltman, who was the chair of the Department of Religion at Pacific Union College, a lifelong employee of the church, and a man with a PhD, he was funded by the General Conference to do a study. They asked him to do this. He did it, and he was somewhat reluctant to say anything bad about her. And he's the one who's saying these things that we're reading to you.
Exactly.
So we're not, neither Peter nor I have done the study.
Yeah. That's why we're saying, Emmanuel, go and read it. We're just two humans having a discussion about an 8-year study. At the end of Fred Veltman himself, you and Kevin would love Fred Veltman because he draws the same conclusions as you both.
Yeah.
That Ellen White was a prophetess, that she had visions from God, that she's a special, unique individual. Now, Kevin has said, what did Veltman say about plagiarism? And again, we're kind of looking at verbatim. We're looking, so
he says, I think he said that really wasn't what he was out to study or to even make any. That's my recollection. I need to try to find that.
I'll read this again. So Veltman does the 8-year study, Kevin and Emmanuel, that you both know about. And the church's public response. So Veltman's not talking about plagiarism. I don't even, does he? He doesn't use the word. He uses more like verbatim, copying, borrow, paraphrase, this kind of thing. Why, after this 8-year study, does the church most public view, because this wasn't officially printed, it was made available to people. I might be wrong, but I vaguely remember that if you bought the copy of it back in the day, it was $400 or $500 US back in the 80s. But why then does the church's official statement say the 8-year study of Ellen G. White's possible borrowing of materials from other writings for her book, The Desire of Ages, ended this year, with researcher Fred Veltman concluding that her book does contain some ideas and phrasing similar to those of other writers, but that it is independent of verbatim borrowing? There's a classic nothing to see here comment. And Kevin and Emmanuel, that's kind of what we're trying to address. What does Veltman say? And that's what we're looking at. And we point out things that he said, and you say, show us the proof. Why the big cover up from the church? Why don't they just say, okay, well, yeah, there's some pretty serious findings here. Bring it out into the open. Why hide it?
Here's from Fred Veltman on page 225 of Trenchard's book. He said, it is clear from these passages and from her statements on the nature of her writings that Ellen White understood the content of her writings to have been derived from the Lord. He quotes her, "You know how the Lord has manifested himself through the spirit of prophecy. Past, present, and future have passed before me. I have been aroused from my sleep with a vivid sense of subjects previously presented to my mind, and I have written at midnight letters that have gone across the continent." End of quote. And then Veltman says, Ellen White's claim for the heavenly origin of her writings stands at the crux of the source problem. So, and they agree it was a problem. Veltman says that the church has minimized it, and that Ellen White minimized it. And that, and let me find this one, I think, where he said she largely denied it. He was asked if he thought Ellen White was guilty of plagiarism, and he said, although this research project did not treat the question of plagiarism, it is my opinion that some future study will conclude that she was not a plagiarist. But again, that was not what he was commissioned to study. He also was not an expert on plagiarism, and he never pretended to be one.
Yeah, that's good. And I said I wouldn't bring up Emmanuel's stuff again, but Emmanuel, you're so engaging. I can't wait for our interview tomorrow. It's going to be explosive. You'll want me to prove stuff, and I won't. I'm just interested in what you believe, why you believe it. Can you defend it? You need to come with lots of proof tomorrow. You're making the belief claims. So you guys, I'm interested in this. You guys are bolstering your disdain for Ellen White. So you're putting words in our mouth there, Emmanuel. I've never, ever said that I have a feeling of disdain for Ellen White. Never said that. I don't believe that. I just simply don't believe she had visions from God. There's no disdain there. It's just the conclusion I've drawn after my involvement with the church. And then he just says, you've got this disdain for Ellen with a study that believes she is a prophet. The study didn't say she believes she's a prophet. The study, Veltman did the study and drew his conclusions that Ellen White, is a prophet. But the study reveals a lot more than just his own personal conclusions.
Peter, I'm somewhat insulted because I think you hold me in disdain because I think you don't believe I'm a prophet.
Exactly.
You can think somebody's not a prophet and not hold them in disdain.
I just called you a prophet when you predicted that Kevin would say great controversy. Yeah. So
yes, you did.
You're putting words in my mouth.
So you don't hold me in disdain. Good. Okay.
This is interesting. Kevin said, because he's actually spoken to Fred on the phone, I think Kevin mentioned. He volunteered for the study. That is what he told me. But he wasn't first choice for the study.
No. That's interesting. I wonder if, well, if he told you that,
tell us.
then I believe you, Kevin. But
Emmanuel's put, you guys are literally using a study that disagrees with your conclusions. You use it to bolster your position. That is possible to do that. Did you know that, Emmanuel? It is possible to look at a study that draws different conclusions to yourself, to the person who made the study even. That's what humans do. We read stuff and we come to our own conclusions. You and Kevin have drawn yours. Arthur and I have drawn ours.
And that's a great thing, whether we're free to do that. And I honor your right and privilege to draw whatever conclusions you'd like.
And Emmanuel says, but it is weird. No, it's not weird at all. It's like, you have obviously read the Gospels and come to a conclusion that they needed an additional amendment in 1844. I've read the Gospels and come to the conclusion they haven't. But the source material people read, it's not weird. It's not weird that we come to different conclusions.
And I would say this too. My view that you're wrong, Emmanuel, when I get to the end of it all and say, and what difference does that make? I don't have this deep-seated belief that because you don't agree with me, or because you hold a different view of the Bible or Jesus or Ellen White, that somebody I worship is going to burn you to death.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't worship somebody who I thought was going to burn you to death for having a different opinion than my own. I think you think otherwise.
That's the difference. Yeah. Yeah, that is the difference. George Tichy has written, no amount of evidence will convince the apologists, because keeping the cult alive is for them more important than the truth about the facts. Discussing with them is a waste of time. I think trying to change Kevin or Emmanuel's mind, that is potentially a waste of time. But having the discussion for all to see, I think it's a good thing, because it really, when people watch a lot of these interviews, those that aren't Adventists or those that are fringe Adventists go, wow, there's a lot of cray-cray going on here.
I may have to watch tomorrow night and make some comments in the chat. I see Emmanuel says that he disagrees. He doesn't think that at all, that because I don't believe that God's going to burn me to death.
Yeah.
You must not believe in the Bible, Emmanuel.
He's got, if you bring facts, then I will believe. So okay. Our interview, I expect you to bring lots of facts for us there. I'm not going to be bolstering anything of our interview tomorrow with my facts, because you're making the claims. We're just looking at people who've, put a spotlight on some of the claims. But it's going to be an engaging interview. I'm looking forward to it tomorrow. But let's get away from the chat. I'm turning my chat off.
Okay.
It's off. I can't see it. I'm turning it off. I want to get back to Veltman. You said an interesting thing there about his views there on plagiarism. What else was following that?
Okay. I don't remember, but I just opened the book again, and my eyes fell upon, actually, it's not that tricky, my eyes falling upon something, because I went through and highlighted and underlined a number of things. But there's this one, when they review chapter 3, they say, before concluding the summary of chapter 3, we must note that 2 documents we examined in connection with this chapter show that Ellen White personally borrowed from her literary sources. Manuscript 24, 1891, available in hand script, and a letter to J.H. Kellogg, John Harvey Kellogg, written in 1895 and available in typescript, demonstrate literary dependency at an early pre-publication stage and in a personal form. We thereby conclude that this paraphrasing from a source was the work of Ellen White and not one of her literary assistants. So Ellen White apparently wrote some directive to John Harvey Kellogg. I don't know, I can't tell from this whether it was something she had seen in a vision or what, but she wrote something to John Harvey Kellogg, and it turns out that she had borrowed or used a literary source to put it together. So, and that's how Veltman and his crew decided that that's one of the things they used to say, yeah, it was her that was doing it, not her assistants, not a personal letter.
Exactly. I'd be interested, and I think with this book coming out, just hold it up again for those who want to go and search it, the Trenchard book. It's just released this year, Desire of Ages and its Sources. I think Kevin Morgan held that up in my interview with him. I think that's where I've seen it before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Kevin, yes, you're welcome back to talk about this topic.
I thought you turned off your chat, Peter.
I had turned it off. I was just about to ask Jim a question, so I just put it on and just noticed at the top there.
That's it. I don't believe you're inspired anymore.
Yeah, that's it. I'm flawed. No, I just quickly put it back on because I wanted to ask Jim a question, and you, and Matthew, and thought they may have a comment on this. The book's just released. I think there's going to be a lot of interest now again in this study. Wouldn't it be great to have a independent researcher that holds no bias, a non-Adventist researcher to study this? Go to the 2,500 pages from Veltman, go to the Trenchard book, expand it a bit, use some AI technology. I think that'd be much needed to see that.
Use some of these software programs that major universities use to detect plagiarism in papers and PhD theses and the like. They're out there. There are several different ones, and they are used, and it would be very easy and probably not as expensive. I don't know. Maybe not as expensive as the Veltman study, and it would be independent and much more thorough. I mean, Veltman did an amazing job with the limited resources they had, I think. That was hard.
Kevin says it doesn't work on E.G. White writings. I've got a simple AI app that does work with Ellen White writings in summarizing. I can say, write a summary of Desire of Ages, write a summary of. So I'm pretty sure and Veltman lists the 10 main books that are used in Desire of Ages where she is influenced by.
And maybe, Kevin indicates it doesn't work on, maybe when you invite him back, and I hope that you do, because he's a very interesting man. I think that would be, I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah. And it might be correct that you can't at the moment. Yeah, there will come a day, right? Chat's going off again. There will come a day that this technology is available, and I hope it's sooner than later. I'm not a fan of AI, to be honest, but if someone out there start researching, we can crowdfund it. There's a good idea. Find the 10 books, compare them to Desire of Ages, go for it. Independent analysis.
And maybe add some other books too. So, I was going to find, I ran across it just today when I was looking at my notes from the book about I told you when I was here before about the party, that they decided that the picnic, a party would not be the right word. A picnic, they decided that the Review and Herald employees needed because they were working so hard, and these people work 6 days a week, and it was just, it's kind of funny, and it isn't. It's a criticism of them in a sense, but in another sense, it's just a reflection of what it was like being a member of the early Adventist church. It's something that probably most of us would have a very difficult time doing. And let's keep talking, and I'll find it. It won't. I found it earlier. It won't be hard to find. So, here, I think I am about to. They did it on a Sunday. Well, now I'm having difficulties. I'll bring up your next point or next question, unless you want me to do it.
Yeah, I'm just interested in spending, the half hour or so that we've got, just really digging deep into the last kind of conclusions you came to from the research there. I'm just doing a little bit of plugging while you're.
Here, I found this. This is from J.N. Andrews, the J.N. Andrews biography by Gil Valentine. In a creative attempt to continue strengthening and restoring fellowship, the publishing house was closed, and Sabbath observers took a rare day off work to gather for an early summer Sunday picnic out at Gugauk Lake. I probably said that wrong. It was a rather stiff affair, with no games or lighthearted banter allowed. A temperance talk in the morning was followed by singing and testimonies in the afternoon. Uriah Smith reported the day a success because there was a, quote, gratifying absence of fun, end of quote. Ellen White also noted approvingly the absence of, quote, jesting and joking, end of quote. And I thought, wow, that's like no picnic I ever want to go to. And if you're thinking of putting one on, Peter, don't invite me.
We don't want to have fun. We're having a party for the girls tonight. I've said before, I'm an older dad. Had my first daughter when I was 50. She's
wow.
She's 11 now, so that gives away my age. But they're so excited, and so we had Christmas karaoke, and all their friends are coming and family, and it's going to be a great night. But now I'm reminded of, if I was a follower of Ellen White, I'd be reading that statement and going, I must remember tonight not to have too much fun.
Well, it's better not to have any
fun at all. Yeah.
Maybe start out with a temperance talk followed by testimonies. That's the appropriate kind of picnic. I am concerned for your daughters, however, because I noted in your intro with those with their two pieces that were played, and that looked suspiciously like dancing to me.
It looked like dancing and fun. And I'll give you a little secret, a little bit of
a deadly combination.
I'll give you a little bit of information. That last group that you saw there having fun was up at Avondale.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Well, that just shows you how the mighty have fallen.
The mighty have fallen. I was banned from doing gigs there after 30 years because of that footage.
I'll bet.
Well, I've got some good news I'll share in a day or two on that topic.
Oh, good.
Okay.
I have a question for you that's not completely on topic, but might be a little bit. When I talked to you before, you talked about you were going to go to Avondale, to the archives there, to the Ellen White Center there, and I think you were going to try to find out if there were copies of the digital copies of the recording of the Prexad meeting between Walter Ray and a number of church luminaries, including Robert Olson. I think Don McAdams was there. Did they have it?
I haven't yet, but the lady that's teeing it up has sent me a reminder.
Good.
And a good friend of mine just married the guy that runs the White Estate there.
Oh.
So I might be able to, and he's more than happy for me to come and look around, and they're opening the vault to me.
Good.
I don't know if there'll be sections I can't go. So those watching, if there's things you want me to find, please put them in the comments, and I'll go and have a look. And Emmanuel, if you're still watching, Emmanuel Jisoo, champion of Jesus, Emmanuel. Tomorrow, I don't want you smiling at all, please. I don't want any laughter or mirth in our interview.
A temperance talk would be fine.
What's that?
A temperance talk followed by testimonies would be
I'll
fun.
be giving you a little temperance talk. I'm going to do these for special for 20. No, make $10 plus postage. Anywhere in the world, let me know.
Do you have an idea how much postage would be to the United States?
Well, I just sent 5 CDs to Dale a week or two ago after some failed attempts, and it cost me 21 Australian dollars. So that's probably $2 US.
I don't think it's quite that bad.
Maybe 15 US dollars. So yeah, so you could have people watching SDAQ&A mug. The only reason I thought of that is you were talking about temperance talk beforehand. These are you're only to put drinks that have no sugar, no tea, no coffee, no alcohol.
Oh, yeah. Good. Here, let's be a little, let's show even-handedness. Chapter 16 of Trenchard's review, or condensed version, and the chapter may correlate to the chapter in Veltman's report. I'm not sure, because once I saw this book and got this book, I ditched trying to go through Veltman's report. This is so much easier.
I'm so glad you found that book, because I felt a bit bad. I had read the 2,500 page report, but I must say I struggled great.
Yeah, it's such a slog. And it could be, you said Kevin might have pointed it out to you. I'm not sure where I learned about it. It could be that I saw it, I don't know.
Kevin, let us know. I'm pretty sure you held up that book in our interview. Someone did. And I remember thinking I must buy that, but I didn't until last night.
Okay, well, I'm looking here at chapter 16 of this book, and it talks about the Walk to Emmaus chapter of the Desire of Ages, which is chapter 83. And I'm reporting on this one because I want to be fair. It says only 2 sources facilitated the composition of this chapter and the earlier related writings. And they say Veltman found that this was pretty much a rewriting of the Spirit of Prophecy corresponding book. And while there were 2 main sources used in it, there are some parallels. There were no minor sources, and frankly, it was there are no primary sources for the Desire of Ages text or for the earliest text used to develop chapter 83. So that was one of the most independent, though there were still some parallel, some not so much parallels as to sources used in the formation of the chapter, but it was probably the weakest of the ones I looked at here, probably one of the weakest in terms of showing strict, paraphrases and things like that. So there's some credit. Let's give credit where credit is due. Or at least the study found nothing real clear about that. And I see Kevin said he got it from Ron Graybill. And of course, I think Ron Graybill's connected to Oak and Acorn Publishing. And I would note that I see Oak and Acorn Publishing. This book says Oak and Acorn Publishing out of Westlake Village, California. But I also noticed that on the back inside cover of the page, it says made in United States, Troutdale, Oregon. And Troutdale, Oregon is just on the east side of Portland. And when I go to Portland, drive to Portland, it's a 3-hour drive to hit Troutdale. So I know that area very well. So anyway.
Gil Valentine's books are published through that same publisher, aren't they?
It is. I'm pretty certain. I know that. I'm pretty sure you're right. Yeah.
Is it an independent Adventist publisher, or?
I think so. I think it is. Yeah. And I also have a book that I read in the last couple of weeks that I got from Oak and Acorn that is called The Struggle for the Prophetic Heritage, I think. And it really kind of takes us on if I'm remembering it correctly, on a path from the 20s to the mid to late 30s, where the White Estate, Ellen White died, there was struggle for control of the White Estate, and the White Estate eventually ended up moving from St. Helena from Elmshaven there to to Washington, where the General Conference was located, and it's really more of an inside politics sort of view of the struggle, who was going to control the white estate, the heritage that was Ellen White. And Willie White, of course, played a big role, and Arthur played a smaller role. But if I'm remembering correctly, after Willie White died, or William White died, W.C. White, I think that's when it was shortly after that it was able to be pulled off. But there was, it's interesting, just it doesn't say good things or bad things about Ellen White. It just shows that there was a real struggle to control access to and control of the prophet after she was gone. And it should come as no surprise to anyone that anytime you have an institution that is run by people, there is politics involved, and there is struggle for control involved. And the White Estate and the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists is no different. But again, that should surprise no one. Yeah. But it was still interesting because you kind of know about the players, and it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
And Gil Valentine's a pretty good writer.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say pretty good. I think he's an excellent writer. And what I like most about him is I get the feeling when I read his work that he writes a balanced account and it appears to me that he doesn't have an agenda, which will cause some people who are listening to say, well, then he must have an agenda because you like him. But I don't think that's the case. I think he just plays it straight.
Yeah. There's a community of Adventists that I love dipping into. I'm not smart enough to, converse with them, but they've been on the show. Ron Grable, Denny 14, Gil Valentine, Larry Garrity, Fritz Guy when he was alive, and a number of others that I just really enjoy listening to them talk about this kind of stuff. Yeah. Now, in our final 20 minutes, I know you've got a lot of post-it notes and things there in the study. Can you just kind of just read through some of those things for us? And I won't comment too much. I just want to just kind of absorb some of the material there, and then bring us to some of the conclusions in 20, 25 minutes.
Well, I think one of the most important things is that what this study does, and what Veltman does fairly, and by fairly I don't mean does an okay job, I mean does in a fair manner, is he points out, he does say that the church and James White and Ellen White did truly minimize the extent of her use of other people, that they were very clear that it was very minor usage, and that it was more along the lines of, if you found, as it said in the 1911, I think it was the 1911 Great Controversy, that in the introduction, which had to be trotted out there because of the criticism that was being engendered, but said, well, if she finds something that of a fact that's incontrovertible and written by a historian of a qualified historian, she has felt free to copy that material, and she's put that in quotes so that you can see what it is. The problem was that in the earlier editions it hadn't been in quotes, so that helped. But it also in the introduction talks about how the Veltman study came about. Well, this committee, I think I referred to it as Prexad, and many others have too, after Walter Ray came out and he was beginning to share around Southern California, and of course that got around, that he was finding very heavy dependence. This committee was put together by I think Neil Wilson, the then president of the General Conference, and they met with Walter Ray in Glendale, California, and they reviewed Ray's work. It says when the Glendale committee reviewed Ray's work, they were impressed by the number of sources Ellen White used, the various kinds of content exhibiting parallels from the sources, and the varying degrees of literary dependence. they recognized that there was enough literary borrowing to merit a serious study of one of her major works. They also agreed that they wanted a scholarly comparative study of her text and of 19th century writers. And I think that paragraph tells us more than anything else that various people said, well, we've always known, and they weren't hiding. Then why was this committee of worthies, including Robert Olson from the White Estate, impressed by the number of sources that she used, the varying kinds of content exhibiting parallels from the sources, and the varying degrees of literary dependence? And they recognized that there was enough literary borrowing to merit a serious study of one of her major words. This is 1980. If it was known all along and nobody was hiding anything and Ellen White wasn't minimizing it, why in 1980, what'd she die in, 15? 65 years after her death, they're surprised. Really? The people who controlled the vaults? And Kevin says, because we weren't aware generally. Exactly. We weren't aware because it was minimized. And because we were told by the White Estate and, yes, by the prophet herself that it was very little. There's nothing to see here. Keep moving. Just read this and accept it as gems given to me by God. So that's why it was a surprise. So that's why it was necessary. And, Kevin says they weren't looking. Why would you need to look if Ellen's already shared with you openly what she was borrowing and what she was using? What were these guys doing in the White Estate? You control this vault, and they were just answering questions about recipes that Ellen White used. They had scholars asking to come into the vault and research materials. That's where Ronald Numbers got a lot of his material. They reviewed all the stuff that Ronald Numbers found and criticized his book before it was published, and he made a lot of changes that he thought were reasonable. Ronald Graybill got booted out of the White Estate for using some materials that were in the White Estate that they didn't want to be generally known because it shared material that they would be embarrassing to the White Estate, and they didn't want that generally known. Yeah, if they weren't looking, it's kind of like the person who crosses the street and doesn't look both ways and say, well, can't blame him for getting hit. He wasn't looking. Well, maybe he should have been looking, and maybe there's no excuse for not looking. So that's that. I've kind of ran off into a rant.
To look. It was convenient not to look.
Yeah, that's right.
There was an audience growing and growing that loved the myth of Ellen, and they were the ones buying the books. Yeah,
and to the White Estate's credit, and I think it was also a good tactical move. I think almost everything, and there may be some things that are still held, but there isn't much. If it isn't, they've kind of opened it all up. You can go into the White Estate, whiteestate.org, and search her writings. That letter that we talked about last time with Kevin, and in the chat with Kevin and the letter I read to you about what Grady Smoot said and what a couple of other people said and what Valentine said about this very, I thought, rude and crude letter that Ellen White wrote to Andrews on his deathbed. That's available. If you put in the right search terms, and that's always the trick with any search engine, is just coming up, narrowing the terms enough so that you can find it. And like Kevin says, I'm looking and it's fascinating. And I agree, it is fascinating, but it wasn't available before. You couldn't see it. And that's been one of the real benefits. And that has another benefit, because when you open up the vaults and then you have your crews of apologists ready to go out and that really doesn't mean that. You're taking it out of context, whatever. People are satisfied. They don't feel the need to look because somebody else was looking for me. And guess what? They told me it doesn't really matter. And so that's why I say it's a good tactical move. But it's also a good move because people like us like to be able to go and take a look now and again. And I appreciate that. And I think that's what an archive really should be, not be a place to hide things. So, okay. And I already read and shared last time and this time what James White wrote in the Review and Herald, where he said, look, that Ellen is truly the real thing because her stuff is so good. Nobody else can match it. And she has things that, it would take tons of credulity to believe that she isn't inspired when you look at the stuff that she knows and can share with us that she gets from God. Well, that would not fly today. And it would be, James White would not make that argument today.
Mm-hmm.
So the White estate chose first Jim Cox. We talked about that before. Jim Cox took a call to Avondale, so he was not available anymore. And so they went to Fred Veltman. There's a comment here that Fred Veltman said he volunteered for it. Maybe he did. I have no way of knowing, so I'm not going to gainsay that. But I think Fred Veltman took on I think he approached it perhaps with a little trepidation. Jim Wagner might have a better idea about that than anybody else would. But though Kevin said he talked to Veltman, so he may have a very good idea. Though Jim was involved early on in the early stages of beginning the search. So, so they got Veltman on board. It was supposed to be a 2-year study initially, and they were going to study all of Desire of Ages. That was a way bigger bite than anybody could chew, and so they, by pure random selection of 3 different varieties of chapters, chose 15 chapters to study and to compare. They did their study. It took just short of 8 years, and this book summarizes his. That's interesting. Summarized it in a readable form that all of you can appreciate. If you want to see the tables and all that were used, you can go to the archives and see that. So, but if you're satisfied with reading the conclusions without doing your own study, read this book, because it fairly properly details what they found. And if it doesn't accurately do it, I would be shocked, because it's Oak and Acorn, and because it's Warren Trenchard. And while I don't know a lot about Warren Trenchard, his bona fides seem bona fide to me. I mean, he seems, and the style in which he wrote and the things he said, the balance with which he said them, impressed me greatly. So what we learned from this report, and not everyone who's here will agree with my conclusions, what we found is that Ellen White used a wide variety of sources, that it appears clear to this reader from what Veltman said, is that Ellen White used to sit at night with open books in front of her, writing tidbits into her scrapbooks. And I'm going to be charitable here. It may be that she kind of blocked that all out, and she may not have had intended to turn those into books when she was copying them down. But those books were used to form the Spirit of Prophecy, and they were used to form the Desire of Ages. And it's hard for me to imagine that she wouldn't have realized what was in her books, her scrapbooks, once they started, they were being trotted out to be trotted out sounds demeaning. I mean, brought out to be used in the Desire of Ages. And I'm relatively certain that when she read the rough drafts, the early drafts, that she might have realized that those weren't her words, that wasn't her writing, that it was written by somebody who had a greater degree of training and sophistication. And by sophistication, I mean educational sophistication, to be able to turn out that kind of product.
Yeah. And even if she didn't realize and didn't intend for the journals, she signed off on the finished product. So she read it, and she would have gone, "Oh, that's right, I did get that from Hannah."
And she always there. And she said so many times that she didn't read anything until she'd first written her stuff out. At least with the health materials. And I found things that said, well, was it in here or someplace else I read recently, said that she would get books, she would get articles from Kellogg, from his journals, from the journals, the medical journals he would get, and then she would say, I think it's in here, say, well, I need some of those articles for publication and then their own publication. That's And he knew it. Kellogg knew what she was doing.
Yeah.
And he told us later.
Way back to Kenwright, he knew it as well.
He did. And so when he revealed it, did the church say, okay, she uses a lot of materials, but God shows her what to use? No, they didn't. They attacked and brutalized him. If you want to talk about viciously attacking, they called him a Judas, and that's what set Kenwright off in the first place. Kenwright had made a deal with them. I'm going to keep quiet. I'm not going to attack you folks. Let's make this a gentlemanly separation. And then in the Review and Herald, they refer to him clearly as being a Judas. And then that's when the gloves came off. Well, unfortunately, that's the pattern that I think we see in the church throughout a long period of time, whether it's Kenwright, whether it's Fanny Bolton, whether it's was it W.W. Fletcher? I think there was Fletcher who had a different, or Ballinger. Ballinger was another one. There were you cross the party line, and which really means you undermine the spirit of prophecy, and you're going to get attacked. And Ron Numbers can attest to that.
Yeah.
So, or could. Unfortunately, he's passed. But
that's sad. Yeah.
So anyway,
why do you think it is? And we'll perhaps close on this. I've been good. I haven't had the chat open, so I'm not sure what's going on over there. And I did something I don't normally do. I made the screen big so I could see your head right up close.
Oh, that could be scary.
I felt like I was right there having a conversation. I'll do that more often. There's the two quick things. There was in one of the where you find the full study, there's also some information. There's an interview someone has with him that I thought was quite interesting. Did you come across that? And they ask him, I think, 7 questions.
Yeah, there were several questions. It's toward the end.
Can you just do a bit of a read of the question and answer that he gave?
Yes. And let me see if I can kind of, without reading the whole thing, kind of share some of that. And
it does give it quite a good assessment of what his conclusions that he drew from the study.
Okay. Question. Yeah, I think he has a general summary at the end. He says, on the following pages, we list the 14 questions and answers that summarized our findings for the 15 Desire of Ages chapters examined. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And the first one was, what handwritten Ellen White material do we have for the Desire of Ages texts? And he said, we found no chapters of the Desire of Ages in either handwritten or copy form, but we located several sentences from 3 chapters in her diaries and discovered significant portions of 3 additional chapters in some 1,897 manuscripts. That's 1,800. No, I'm wrong. That's not what he's saying. 3 additional chapters in some 1,897 manuscripts. That means manuscripts from that year. Yeah. I misread that. There's no comma there. So it's 1,897. We also found handwritten and copied texts for portions of the pre-Desire of Ages text behind 10 Desire of Ages chapters. So that's a good answer there. Number 2, question 2. What were the related earlier Ellen White writings and how do they compare to Desire of Ages text? And the answer was, there is no consistency. Some topics were expanded and others reduced. In cases of the former, that's the expanded, we also found more independent material. Desire of Ages usually showed less source dependence than the pre-Desire of Ages text. So there's where you see the evidence of Marion Davis and, inputting other material and fixing some things up and maybe adding some more recent Ellen White material.
And watering it down a bit so it's harder to tell.
But longer Desire of Ages chapters show no greater dependence than shorter ones. Question 3, how does the content of Desire of Ages text compare with that of Ellen White's earlier related writings, and does it show its use of sources? And the answer is the context of DA text and its use of sources are basically the same as the SP text, as the Spirit of Prophecy text. A consistent variation found in Desire of Ages text, however, was the stronger spiritual appeals and lessons, a dissimilarity not explained by source use, but its evangelistic purpose. And that is to say that she expanded on things that she probably came up with herself, or maybe she got from other Adventists, but the fact is she would expand on some of these things that weren't, with expand on things that were borrowed with that stuff that wasn't. Number 4, what are the significant differences between DA text and the pre-DA text? And he says, although the context of the Desire of Ages, I'll say DA, and pre-DA text is very similar, differences appear in the order of events, how the texts harmonize the biblical accounts, and DA's exclusion of some extra biblical materials. While the sources no doubt influence the chronology of her narrative and thematic arrangements of DA texts, it is not always possible to determine when a revision is from the influence of a source or from a closer reading of the biblical account. Here's some shorter answers. Number 5, how much of DA text shows literary dependence? See our answer under question 7. Number 6, what is the degree of independence of DA text? Answer, see our answer under question 7. And then here's 7, what is the degree of dependence of DA text? The 15 DA chapters we examined contained 2,624 sentences or evaluation units, of which 823, 31.4%, were clearly dependent on literary sources. 1,612.
I think that's a significant number just to highlight and just put a little, pin there. Can you just read that last little sentence there?
All right.
It's 30.
The 15 DA chapters we examined contained 2,624 sentences, of which 823, or 31.4%, were clearly dependent on literary sources.
Clearly dependent.
Yeah. 1,612, 61.4% were independent, and 189, or 7.2%, were independent Bible quotations. We rated, and then he gives the rating, and this, I have a problem understanding this. He said, we're rating the average dependence of the 823 dependent sentences as 3.3 and 1.12 for all sentence units except those with independent biblical quotations. Yeah, he explains earlier on how he comes up with that. I got to say, I was bamboozled by that.
To me, it's like 30%, just over 30% is clearly dependent on other sources. That's the number.
And he has this weighted system, and
to the 1.5 and 3.5%.
Yeah. So read the book, and maybe you'll figure it out.
Trenchard, any little notes in his book? Does he have a little comment there that, hang on a second, it looks like 30% is clearly dependent. Why am I saying only 1% or 3% or 2%?
Not where I'm looking at, but it could be in another spot here.
Yeah. So back to questions.
Question 8, what major works contributed to writing DA text? He answers, the major sources with more than 10 parallels for any of the 15 examined chapters of DA in order of their use and with their number of parallels are Hannah, 321, used in 13 chapters, March, 72, Farrar, 62, Harris, 62, March, there are 2 different books that were March, 57, Jones, 52, Edersheim, 29, Ingram, 26, Wayland, 16, and Cumming, 11, which I take from that more that Ellen White read a lot and wrote a lot of stuff into her scrapbooks. That's what I would take from it. And I'm going to stop for just a second because it just hit me. Kevin Morgan had said that that Ron Grable had told him this. I've heard Ron Grable a couple of times talking at various sessions where he says there's a group of people who get together and who are very great friends. I think Jonathan Butler's one of them, and there's another person or two. And he mentioned that one of them, who's a great friend of his, is more conservative, but they get along great. And I remember now, he said Kevin Morgan. So Kevin Morgan gets together with a group of historians like John Butler and Ron Grable, and that's not, I think that's praising Kevin Morgan. So
you're a member of the Dead Prophet Society.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's high praise for Kevin Morgan that these guys get together and share stories. And yeah, that's great. I envy him. Okay. Question 9, what additional sources contributed to DA text? Answer, the minor sources with no more than 10 parallels for any of the 15 examined chapters of DA in the order of their use and with their number of parallels are Fleetwood, 13, Geikie, 13, Pentecost, 11, Miller, 10, Bennett, 8, Boyd, 8, Dodd 7, Thayer 7, Kiddo 6, Kennedy 5, March 4, Lang 3. That the March there was desert. I'm not sure. Andrews 2, Cumming 2, Cumming another book 2, Deems 2, Hall 2, Crumaker 2, Melville 2, Smith 2, and Nickel 1. Again, that illustrates, because it's small numbers, is that it illustrates how widely read and widely she wrote down things.
Which is impressive.
Yeah, it is. That's kind of praiseworthy. If she had been a little more forthright, it's really praiseworthy.
Claimed it was from God, you'd go, wow, good on you. Well read. You've compiled from all these sources. If she had said, hey, look, I feel inspired and God's given me this vision to look at all these books. I've list all the books, and I've got great information to share, and I've cherry picked, and here's the results. And thank you, Marion, for all the great editing.
Before I move on, just another little criticism of the church.
We'd be praising her if that had happened.
Yeah, that's right. Another little criticism of the church. The church I grew up in, and I think it's still to some degree today, encourages people to read Adventist materials and not to go really outside of the Adventist bubble. I have a very good friend who I was going to, I didn't go to some streaming meeting he and I both usually go to, because I said I'm going to something else that day. I paid for a bit to go to a several hour seminar by Bart Ehrman, and online seminar. And I talked a little bit about it and said I was looking forward to it, told him what it was about. And he said, who's Bart Ehrman?
Yeah.
And my friend is a very well-read person and a very intelligent person with an advanced degree. Yeah. But he's a faithful Adventist, and he tends to read Adventist materials. And that's not a criticism of him. I think it's a criticism of the church that you didn't hesitate at all to laugh and say, oh, Bart Ehrman. I mean, if you don't, anyway, Bart Ehrman's about as famous as
like being a rock musician and not knowing who Elvis.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So number 10, and we're getting there, folks. To what extent were literary sources used in the composition of the pre-DA writings? Answer: Marion Davis compiled Ellen White's earlier related writings into scrapbooks, which she used to develop DA. Many source parallels in DA first appeared in these writings, including Spirit of Prophecy. The sources with 10 or more parallels in the pre-DA text that appeared in DA in order of their use and with their number of parallels are Hannah, 244, used in 11 chapters, Harris, 131, Melville, 89, Farrar, 82, March, 77, March, a different book, 74, Winslow, 53, Fleetwood, 26, Geikie, 23, and Cumming, 10. So again, a very wide selection. Ellen White didn't limit herself to Adventist writings. No, that's for sure. Not at all.
Yesterday, there's some
number 11. How does DA... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, like we chatted yesterday, there's some fiction authors.
Yes. Ingram. Apparently she used some fiction material from Ingram. Number 11. How does DA text compare with the pre-DA text in the use of literary sources? Answer: in the pre-DA material we were able to examine, we found the same level of dependence or greater than in DA text. So the earlier it was the same or greater. Of the 1,180 sentence units reviewed, 879 were dependent. That's 74%. Strict verbatim 6, verbatim 80, strict paraphrase 232, simple paraphrase 238, loose paraphrase 64, source Bible 54, partial independence 205. Of these sentences, 269 or 23% were strict independence and 32 or 3% were biblical quotations. The average rate of dependence of the pre-DA dependent sources is 3.57. There we go again with that formula. Compared with DA rate of 3.3, we also determined that Ellen White herself copied from the sources. Now, I know I read that quickly, and if I'd read it slowly, it would have been no more comprehensible. That's why you need to buy Trenchard's book.
All you need to say, though, is the thumbprint of all these authors is the thumbprints are all over her Desire of Ages.
That's a good illustration. That's a good illustration, Peter. I like that. Number 12, it only goes to 14. Then there's a general conclusion. But number 12, how does the content of the dependent sentences in DA compare with that of the independent? Answer, we found no significant content differences in the types of sentences. Both include descriptive, devotional, spiritual, theological, and moral comments. Both contain details one might expect in eyewitness accounts or from visions. However, we noted differences in the way reality was affirmed and the amount or degree of emphasis given a particular topic. Ellen White's independent comments often extended dependent material, and where the source was suggestive or indefinite, she was positive and definite. So when some source might be kind of tentative, she would make it, this is the fact. And not necessarily always, but she would be more likely to do that. And her independent material comments often extended. She would take something she was dependent on, and then she would add something of her own to it. Number 13, to what extent is the thematic structure of DA text dependent on sources apart from the common influence of the Bible? Answer, most DA chapters employ a dominant source but have parallels from several. The final compositions reflect their own structures and not those of a particular source. Ellen White's manuscripts used in the composition of DA tended to rely on single sources. The fact that DA has parallels from multiple sources was likely the result of Marion Davis's conflation of these earlier materials. So Ellen White would write these scrapbooks, had these scrapbooks of various writers, though not labeled as such. And then when Marion Davis gets a hold of these, she would kind of conflate them and they'd get mixed up together. So you lose the identity of them.
Yeah.
And then number 14, to what extent are the pre-DA writings dependent on sources for their thematic structure? Answer, most of Ellen White's diary entries freely and succinctly move among topics. In pre-DA writings on a particular topic, especially the later manuscripts, the thematic development usually follows the structure of the source. Although her material usually depends on a source, her emphasis is often different. So he, in defense of her, because he will say that later, or perhaps it was earlier, say she didn't always agree with the point of the person she was copying. She might make a different point or conclude something different from the material she borrowed. And that's where apologists will say, see, that's fair use because, so that's those are the 14. And then he has his general conclusions.
Read the general conclusion for us. Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to read the general conclusion for us.
Okay.
Important.
Here it is. General conclusions. It has not been possible to answer every question about Ellen White's use of sources. We limited our study to 15 chapters of DA, randomly selected from the 87, aiming to discover the nature and scope of literary borrowing in these chapters. She was known to have used sources when writing Great Controversy, particularly when needing historical background for her visions. But our question about source dependence was whether it played a role in her devotional and theological writings like DA. We did not address in this study the issue of her use of sources in recounting her visions or in comments immediately following her I was shown statements. The 15 chapters of this project contained no mention of vision as a source, nor did we raise the theological question of whether the use of sources comports with the prophetic role. So they didn't really go into that. The study is only one investigation into Ellen White's use of sources. There have been others, and more will follow. Indeed, we have suggested topics for further study. These, of course, do not lessen or dilute the impact of our findings. The numbered conclusions that follow do not necessarily correspond to the 14 questions and answers used in our analysis of the DA chapters and summarized above. So he suggests and calls really for future studies. I'm not hopeful, at least any large-scale studies. We've talked a little bit about how interesting it would be. What I would really love to see, and now that I think about it, I do know a person who I've known since I was in my 20s, who teaches. He worked for some software companies and was a programmer for many years, and then he went to teach at Adventist College. Next time I see him, I'm going to ask him how difficult would it be and what would it cost to put together something where you tried to, Kevin or someone doubted that, might just be too difficult, and he may very well be right. Yeah. But I'd like to, somebody like that would be a good one to bounce it off of and say, look, I'm curious about this. Is it doable? How much would it cost? And then maybe on SDAQ&A, we can do a fundraiser but what would be good too is if you just got raw material so that people could make of it what they would. And so you just have the information. And then those who are sympathetic can be sympathetic still. And those who are critical can be critical still. And we can meet in the middle and say, this is why I think this way. And you can tell me the other. So.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, continue, because you haven't quite finished the conclusion.
And I'm going to read just the heading of each conclusion. Here is his conclusions. Number 1, Ellen White used literary sources when writing Desire of Ages. Number 2, the content of Ellen White's commentary on the life and ministry of Christ, Desire of Ages, is for the most part derived rather than original. And that could be argued a couple of ways too. Somebody could say, well, when he says derived, they mean that she got it from other people. She would say, no, I got it from the Bible and I expanded on that, or I got it from my visions that expanded on that. In that sense, it's derived. So both sides can take that statement and say, yeah, they were derived, not original. And it says, in an ultimate spiritual sense, Ellen White has always insisted that her works were derivative. Both spiritual gifts and spirit of prophecy open with an introductory chapter on the gift of prophecy. So he said, it's clear from these passages and from her statements on the nature of her writings, Ellen White understood the context of her writings to have been derived from the Lord. And of course, that's where, and he quotes from her, you know how the Lord has manifested himself through the spirit of prophecy. Past, present, and future have passed before me. I have been aroused from my sleep with a vivid sense of subjects previously presented to my mind, and I have written at midnight letters that have gone across the continent. And so both sides would say she's derived. The pro-Ellen White people would say derived from God, and the negative people would say derived from other sources. It's unquestionable that it was derived from other sources. The question is, the dispute is whether or not she was led to those other sources and she utilized them in order to create something new, or whether or not she was simply borrowing and then trying to put her own spin on things. So that's then number 3, the special character of Ellen White's commentary is to be found in its practical use of scripture and its stress on spiritual realities and personal devotion. And he says DA may be mostly derivative, but that does not deny its originality or portray her as slavishly dependent on literary sources. And that's where many of us would part company. But he shows the fact that he is a faithful Adventist here, despite what he's set forth here, and despite where he points out that she minimized. He says, look, that doesn't mean she isn't original, and it doesn't mean that she's slavishly dependent. And there's a few paragraphs there where it goes on, and I'm getting tired, and I'm afraid everybody else is too, so I'm going to move to the next point. Ellen White used a minimum of 23 sources of various types of literature, including fiction, in her writings on the life of Christ. Number 5, Ellen White's literary assistants, particularly Marion Davis, are responsible for the published form of DA, and I think everybody would agree with that. And those were his conclusions. And then he makes some faith statements. If you believe that Ellen White was inspired of God, why are you spending so much time searching out possible sources for her writings? And he goes on and just says, it behooves us to obtain knowledge about, just as we do with the Bible, about its text, its history, and background, if we expect her writings to remain relevant in the church. I think that's probably undisputable. And number 2, do you think that Ellen White was guilty of plagiarism, as some have charged? And he says, that wasn't what we were trying to, we weren't addressing that issue. And he said, they asked, how do you harmonize Ellen White's use of sources with her statements to the contrary? Do you think the introductory statement to great controversy constitutes an adequate admission of literary dependence? And he says, that preface is limited and vague, and it minimizes her use of sources and ignores her practice of paraphrasing them. But we must approach her explanations in the same way that we approach the prophetic experience of others, men and women of Scripture. Until someone conducts this kind of investigation into her prophetic experiences, questions about her admission or denial of literary dependence should remain open. And then they asked, do you personally believe that Ellen White was an inspired messenger of the Lord? And if so, what do you mean by inspiration? And he says, the question isn't one of deciding whether her writings were inspired and which are not, nor a case of deciding when to exchange her prophetic hat for her editorial cap. It's rather one of deciding which comments of the special messenger of the Lord still addresses our world and the realities of life. And I just kind of picked that out of 3 paragraphs where he answers that, but I think it fairly says what he's driving at there. And it expresses his comments as a faithful Adventist believer, even though he is reported to have told Fred Hoyt, don't let them hide this away.
Yes.
So, you know,
there's some conflicting thoughts that come to my mind with his engagement with this that I think are conflicting to me, because I think he's got some conflicted thoughts going on in his own mind.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think I can, if I put myself in his shoes and with his experience, his background, his training, I think I can feel a little bit of it. I think back to the angst I felt as simply a member when I faced some of this and made a different conclusion. But I only had a bachelor's degree from an Adventist school and only had a minor in religion. I hadn't gone on beyond that. And so I never had been employed by the church except for a month or 2 as a call porter or a literature evangelist, very bad and very unsuccessful venture. So, you know, it's hard for me to put myself in his shoes, but one can be sympathetic. I like to think of this, and I've said it before, and I may have said it here, and that is that I think that the Adventist Church has made a huge mistake by building Ellen White up into the demigod that they've made her of. I spent some years in the Lutheran Church and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and they don't treat Martin Luther like that at all. He's simply one character from the Reformation who's occasionally mentioned, but not as this is true because he said it kind of thing. And they'll sing "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," and that's about as far as you get in that brand of Lutheranism with references to Luther. Ellen White was the church's mother, no doubt about that. And as I've said before, I had a mother, you had a mother, Peter. I doubt that you agree with everything that your mother said. In fact, you may know some faults about your mother that none of us would ever know if we had just seen her at church or something like that. But that doesn't change the fact that you love your mother and cherish, if she's no longer living, cherish her memory as I do mine. I could detail a lot of facts about my mother that would probably some people would find outrageous. But the fact is, she had some real strengths too. But I honor her as my ancestor. I do not honor her as the oracle of all things true. When I became a man, I put away childish things. And while I thought everything my mother said when I was a child was true, I don't any longer. I formed my own conclusions.
The difference is, though, I don't think Luther tried to cultivate that idolatry, but I think Ellen did.
Yes, I think so. And it must have been, I'm thinking it might have been almost irresistible.
Yeah.
Once you started getting this attention from the visions, and saw that you had the ability to move people and to control sounds really bad, and I'm not trying to be ultra negative here, but to control it, and likely she was a sincere believer in God and in Jesus, and so I could see that this has kind of a snowball effect, and I'm a little more skeptical about her being completely believing in her gifts all the way through, because I just think this submission thing that I keep seeing pop up in these biographies about other pioneers troubles me. But I think I can understand a little bit, though I've never had anybody follow me like that and never will. But I think they need to treat her as one of the founders to be honored. But what they've done is lock themselves into a situation where that if you disagree with Ellen White on a major issue, that cannot be defended in the Bible, at least according to leading scholars I've read, then that's the mark of a cult.
And I think a lot of Adventists who are more progressive, who want to see Ellen White seen in that way, instead of on the pedestal, they want to see her, and they keep thinking that's going to happen. But I'm 99.999% sure Ellen will never be removed from the pedestal within the Adventist Church. She cultivated the DNA of her on the pedestal. The church cultivated it. The people in the pews love it. She was a rock star. James was the manager, and adulation is intoxicating, and money coming in from that is also like another little sidebar.
I can imagine, and I can imagine a little bit, Peter, that I think you can imagine that more easily than I can, because I've seen video of you standing before a large group of people that are cheering and dancing and really getting into what you're doing. That must feel intoxicating.
Yeah, I think 100%. Like, I can come from a gig when everyone's going crazy, and you feel like you're kind of in control of this kind of wave that you're building, and there's techniques you learn that you go, if you just pause for a second here, now come in and you build a different song here. You're building this energy, and you definitely you're not controlling it. You stop doing some of these little techniques and it falls away. Now, that's not me manipulating the crowd. It's me loving the moment, and I've learned some techniques. But I'll just quickly. Sorry, you go ahead.
And their enthusiasm, your enthusiasm is feeding off of theirs, and it's going back to you. That must be a really heady feeling.
It's a very heady feeling. And I think one of the great things that happened to me is that even though I've been a semi-professional musician and professional for many of the years since 1993, fortunately for me, it never made much money.
Right.
I didn't have the real, the great rock and roll look and the great rock and roll voice. And so fortunately, two things happened. Just a little side thing, but I think it's relevant. I think they noticed pretty early on that they were getting traction. So I'd have these great gigs and people would come along and they'd buy tickets and all this kind of thing. But it wasn't a phenomenal viral traction that made me lots of money. And so that was a blessing for me. It gave me enough to survive. So I then learned this very valuable lesson. For me, it became a trade, and I was so lucky that it was a trade that I loved doing. And so it was no gig ever have I felt like, okay, now I'm going to do this, and if I just soften this, now I'm going to use this little trick. It's based on the joy that just comes from loving it so much. But I think that Ellen's, the timing, the location she was, the people were into mysticism and miracles and visions. Joseph Smith, they were just falling for this stuff. They didn't have Netflix. They didn't have all this stuff. And to put yourself into a dramatic life gave you a sense of meaning. So people like Ellen White come along and they're like, whoa,
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you can. Now, something that Kevin's written in that, because I can't keep my eye out of the chat. He said that Fred Veltman told him, I think I'm reading this correctly, that Veltman told Ray about some of the things I think about things in the Bible, in the New Testament, problems with sourcing and writing and contradictions, I presume, about the New Testament, and that Ray responded, if I knew these things, I wouldn't have written the book.
Yes, he said that in my interview.
Yeah, okay.
And your thoughts on that?
Right, okay. And I kind of agree. And the reason I say that is I've spent an awful lot of time, hundreds of hours reading New Testament, listening to people discussing it, listening to presentations by scholars, and I have real problems with it.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I'm not a believer anymore. So there's danger there. I found that my phone flickered a moment ago because somebody sent a text or something, and I kind of hit it with my thumb, and up popped this quote that I was trying to find. And that I think is this is one of Ellen White's statements that I got told. I can't tell you how many times I heard it. Maybe the quote I heard more than any other. And we heard lots of Ellen White quotes when I was growing up. And it turns out that this one was, I think we would say, it's not even loose verbatim. It's not strict verbatim, but it's really close. The greatest want of the world is the want of men who will not be bought or sold, men who in their utmost souls are true and honest, men who do not fear to call sin by its right name, men in whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole, men who will stand for the right though the heavens fall. And I consider that means being honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what the world needs. And that's one of the reasons I'm no longer how I was raised, because I agree with that statement.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how people, like when I was told, well, Luke copied from, or no, whatever, they all copied from each other. I didn't go, oh, okay, that makes Ellen White fine then. I went, oh, really?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matthew and Luke borrowed large, they've kind of rewrote Mark basically, and they think there were maybe this gospel cue that Matthew and Luke both, anyway.
Drawing from and.
Yes. So, yeah, but I agree with you. That doesn't make me think, oh, but that makes.
That's right. That made me follow the Bart Ehrman path.
Exactly. That's who I'd like to see. Well, anyway.
It's just our personalities, like. Yeah. Some people go, see, they copied it. It's okay to do that. And I'm like, well, I don't think that makes that right. Two wrongs don't make a right.
And it is. You're right. Part of that is personality type. And that's something I'll say from my mother. She had even though she was an Adventist, she had a skeptic. She would call things out as BS when she heard them. And wasn't hesitant.
My mum was the same. So I've got just three things to finish on. But before I do those three things, I don't quite get what Kevin's saying here. So he told me that Ray responded, if I knew these things, I wouldn't have written the book. I don't quite get
the one before, the comment by Kevin before says, he knew similar things in the New Testament and shared it with Ray. I take that to mean the he being Veltman. And Veltman told Ray some things about problems with the New Testament. And then Ray said, well, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have written the book, saying, well, then I don't want to undermine faith in the Bible. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, right. And
I could be wrong. And if you get,
he wouldn't have written this book. Is that what
exactly. And I think that
he wouldn't have wanted to undermine
the Bible. That's what I'm taking that Kevin means. And I think that kind of follows from what he's saying. But if you get Kevin back on again, you can explore that with him.
Kevin said it as well. And I did ask, but
and that's right. He didn't see them as problems. He was able to accept them and say, okay, that explains how inspiration works, I think is what Kevin's saying.
Right.
And that is one of the apologist responses. And it's not, well, I don't buy it. I can't say, well, that's crazy. It's just, that's a different look at it. There, bingo, Kevin.
Kevin, I get it now. I get it.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, information I've had from, I think it was Kerry Wynn in my interview with him, he's had a lot to do with editing Pirates of Privilege, which is the book that came out after The White Lie that was never saw the light of day. He had a lot to do with editing that. And he told me, and Kerry, if you're watching, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was another book after Pirates of Privilege, or enough resources that could be released as a book that he felt shouldn't see the light of day because perhaps Walter Ray was going down the path of questioning everything. So I don't know. That's all hearsay, speculation. But I'd love to just dig into that a little bit more. And boy, the Pirates of Privilege, that's a read as well. Okay, so the three quick things to finish on. If I was God, and I'm not, if Ellen White was a prophetess, and she wasn't, in my humble opinion, if I was God, I would say to her, hey, look, when you're doing a gig and you've got these visions, relate to everyone what you see. That's good. They'll enjoy that. They'll get edification and they'll know more about me from that. So do
Right.
that. But when you write a book or get a book compiled, please be clear, because I can see the future. I know there's going to be issues here that hamper the Adventist church, and you are my special remnant. I want you to make sure that you tell people, I've had visions, I'm recounting them, and now I want to dig a bit deeper with all the study I've done, and I'm going to go for all these authors, and I want, Ellen, I want you to list the authors, and then I'm going to cherry pick all the things that I know God really wants in a written form. Can you do that, Ellen? And she would have gone, yep, I can do that. I just say that in the sense of, it makes so much sense that if it's a genuine prophet, it's a remnant church with a very specific message for these end times. You need to then make sure that you give that message clearly. And Adventism is one big ball of confusion.
Here's how I think the apologist would answer. First, that would have blown her mind, and she probably couldn't have understood that. Secondly, she believed fervently that the, at least probably for most of her life, I think by the time she was getting up into her mid 80s, she realized she wasn't going to survive to see the second coming. But I think she
believed that, didn't she? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think until very late in her life, she probably still believed she was going to see the second coming, and I don't think she could have handled the thought that in 2023. Peter Dixon was going to be interviewing a bunch of ex-Adventists and current Adventists and various others and questioning her. I just think that would have been so outside the possibility of her understanding.
I'm saying if I was God, I would
said,
I know this is going to happen. And she would have gone, oh, really? Okay, well, I thought you were going to come real soon. Okay, that's another topic.
So you're thinking that when she was talking to Jesus up in one of her visions, he might have explained that to her, hey?
Yeah. And he could have even, there's lots of things he could have explained. But here we are, and I think the last great chance the church had to put this into perspective was Glacier View and Des Ford, and that was the chance, and they didn't run with it. And ever since then, the church, both sides hinder each other. They're not in a very effective, although, there's places in the world where the church is growing rapidly and whatnot, but it's only growing where Ellen is on a pedestal.
Peter, there's danger that lurks there, and I think the church sees that. And I can't help but think the church watched what happened when the Worldwide Church of God, are you familiar with what they did?
Yeah.
They actually said, we were wrong on a lot of these things, and we're backing off, and where are they now?
Yeah, exactly.
They're just gone.
Yeah.
And the church, I think the Adventist church, if I were a functionary or a bureaucrat in the Adventist church, I would fear that. Would fear that. I'd say, there we go, if we start allowing the pedestal to be chipped away.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I say it's never going to happen.
Yeah, it won't.
It's never going to happen. So the second of the three things, one was that little metaphor, if I was God. The second is,
well, don't they say God? There's pictures of God with this long white hair.
That's right. I went to a photo shoot with my daughters the other day for the Santa pictures. So my wife, my two girls, and Santa. And Santa leans across to me as we're leaving. He says, "You'd make a great Santa." And he gave me a card of his agent. And he said, there's good money in it. So
really? Well,
put a beard on.
Yeah.
Look, I would make a great Santa. So next
would, Peter. There you go.
I'm going to do it. So, so the second thing is, obviously, there was none of these authors took Ellen to court over this stuff. Her book survived to this day without illegal action. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is
right or wrong, but here we are, 100 and X years later, where here's the product, Desire of Ages, hold it up against another book, take it for what it is.
I think the copyright laws and the enforcement of them in the 19th century, early 20th century were pretty weak in this country. And one of the things they say about Coney Barrenhausen's book is they say, well, they wouldn't have done anything because their copyright on English books didn't mean anything in the U.S. And that may very well be that copyrights on Australian books wouldn't mean anything here back in those days. And that could be, and also, we're such a litigious society right now. It wasn't like that
back then. Yeah.
Back then.
And like you say, that's not even the point. It's not.
That's right. It's not the point.
Or couldn't. The point is, she claimed it was from God, and she contributed greatly to the mystery and the idolatry.
If I were representing the church and something like that, if I were a copyright expert, one of the things I'd be yelling is fair use. So it's usually fair use you actually give credit. But anyway, it would have been difficult back then.
Yeah.
But I agree. That's not the point.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I can imagine people just loving it. Ellen's come to town. They got a big top tent. She sees this star. James is organizing it. He would do a bit of a talk. He'd wheel her out. She'd do some visionary stuff, and he'd do another little talk. And then they'd say, for a few cents, here's our.
And I've heard she was a powerful speaker.
Yeah, look, she would have been fantastic to witness,
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say, I'm interested in your thoughts on, and thanks again so much for this conversation yesterday and today. Brilliant. I've just loved it. We had 880 people watch the interview in 24 hours. So there's some interest in this topic.
Wow, I'll say.
And I'll check later now that we're live on Instagram. And the podcast, season 1, everyone, it's on Spotify now. So that's the biggest platform.
Wow.
So that's exciting. That happened last night as well. I did a lot last night. I read a lot of the book from Trenchard. I read some of the Jane Andrews Gil Valentine book. I read some of the Ostriches and Canaries.
Wow, you were busy.
And I was connecting the season 1 podcast to Spotify. Anyway, the final thought I'm interested in. A lot of these Adventists that I am so glad that they have these discussions, because they're just fascinating. The people we've mentioned, the Ron Grabels, Matthew Corpman, John Butler, Fritz Guy, Larry Geraghty, Gil Valentine, Denny 14, the list goes on. I love hearing them talk about this stuff. At some point, a lot of them, I'm sure, and in my second season, even admitted that they don't really think anything happened 1844 supernatural. They say it's providential.
Yeah.
What is it? And I'm not criticizing them. I'm so glad they're there. They bring me so much joy. I love anything, Gil has written. I'm reading it, loving it. Not because it reinforces my faith in Adventism, but it's just fascinating. It's a fascinating topic. Anyway, what is it that the Fred Veltmans and all these other guys that are so deep into this stuff and obviously have come to conclusions that make them go, oh, wow, hang on. This is a bit of a tough thing to deal with. I had one pastor recently say to me, hey, look, I've got lots to say on this, but let me just recommend a book to you, which is my favorite book. And I said, oh, okay, what is it? He said, Sapiens. And I said, well, I've already read it. I said, I've read it already. And I suddenly went, oh, I know what you're saying. So why is it that they stay in the church?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me give my take, and it's just my thought. I could be completely out to lunch on this, but did I hear you say you were a 5th generation Adventist?
Yeah,
I was too.
Yeah,
and it's my identity as I grew into adulthood and as I was a child and into my teens. My identity was as a Seventh-day Adventist. That was who I was. That defined me, and to a real extent, it defines me today. Even though I do not believe it, it defines me. I still feel very different when I'm in a social gathering of people who aren't Adventists. I feel different when I'm in a session of people who are Adventists. But it's You feel different. You are different. You don't really fit in. It's easier now than I had a potluck at work. We had a potluck the other day, and there was one other vegetarian in the group, so that helped a little bit. But you're different, and it's your identity, and you are almost rejecting yourself. You're almost rejecting your parents, your grandparents, and the ones before them who are Adventists. In my case, the great great I think it was.
Great, yeah. Mine's
Yeah, and it's just I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for words now, but you don't. You're in a sense you're rejecting yourself. I tell people, I sit as a. This is. I was at work at 4 o'clock this morning because I was too busy yesterday, and I had a docket this morning, a divorce motion docket with 33 cases on it, and I wasn't ready for it. So I got there at 4 this morning. The docket started at 8:15. We got done at 12:15 or 12:20.
Wow.
Well, I tell people often, I have couples in front of me who are divorcing, and I tell them, and I told one today, I said, look, your child, you and your husband, or you and your wife are fighting over this child, and you're saying bad things about the other to this child. Someday that child's going to realize that they're half of that other person too. And when you're criticizing that person, you're telling them that they're not worth anything.
Right.
And I told one couple today, I said, look, you need to realize that this child's not a possession to fight over.
Yeah.
You need to get to a point, because you're harming your child, that where you love your child more than you hate each other.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think in a sense it's like if I hated my mother, if I thought my mother was evil, half of me is my mother.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like when your whole sense of being, your whole thinking process is in identity is I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm different than others. It's hard to turn and walk away from it. It's just, and if you've been employed by the church for your whole career, my, it would be even harder, because your identity would be greater yet. I don't know how it does, how that happens, how people are able to do it.
I was employed for a while as well.
Were you?
As a teacher, yeah.
Oh, that must have made it harder.
I taught through primary school, high school, special ed later on in high school.
Yeah.
Taught music at Avondale. But I think, so one of the things that I think helped me, so I've noticed, not many people who are generational Adventists leave.
Yeah.
I think I'm a rare to actually take their name off the roll. Many leave, but they've just left. And
that's me too. I mean, that's rare.
See, when I left, I made a public statement on Facebook. I said, this is on the Friday night. And I wasn't trying to be theatrical. I just thought I'll just tell everyone in one go, so I don't have to keep telling people. On Facebook, I just wrote, this is my last Sabbath as a Seventh-day Adventist.
Wow.
And that I didn't realize the reaction it would manifest.
Wow.
But that deeply affected me. But then a week later, I literally took my name off the roll. And a few months later, I got the email back saying, you're officially not an Adventist. That's when the deeper level of thing hit me. And that's what surprised me. So I think very few people are multi-generational Adventists that leave and take their name off the roll. A lot of people I interview, I became an Adventist when I was young, or, but I think, this is my thought on that. I think that is deeply mentally unhealthy to create a movement that makes people so wrapped up in the identity of the movement that they can't leave it without becoming deconstructed.
Yeah.
I think that's culpable and shameful that a religion does that. I've been playing music in different denominations and in the secular world since 1983-ish, maybe earlier. And one thing I noticed in playing the other denominations, if you'd run into someone at a Baptist church doing a gig, And then you'd see them at the Anglicans a year later. Yeah, we left that Baptist church. We moved to the other side of town and we're going to the Anglicans now. Or we're going to whatever. There's none of that kind of stigma. So church that creates, to me, if you look at the Adventist church and you simply go, wow, if you decide to leave that, you're going to lose your identity. That is not the remnant church. That is not the true church. That is not a church of God. That is something that is damaging people. Millions of people are damaged because of that.
Yeah. And that, I don't know how one would advise. Well, part of it is this whole wrapped up in the whole remnant thing from the very beginning. You are a people, a peculiar people. You're better than all the other Christians. And you're different. All the other Christians are in league with Roman Catholicism, and the Roman Catholicism is the beast of, it's
and the Sabbath. Ellen White saw a halo around the Sabbath. Got to keep that one.
I read, and this is kind of interesting, that when she had a vision before she understood the Sabbath truth, at one point she saw, and I've got to verify this, she saw the Ten Commandments in the ark, and they didn't have one singled out, but after she saw the Sabbath truth and she went and saw the ark again, there was a glow of light over the fourth.
Yeah, exactly. and a lot of progressive Adventists say, oh, no, it's not a salvational issue. We just keep it because it's for us.
I can get you two or three quotes that say that Ellen White says, if you once understood the Sabbath truth and turn your back on it, you cannot be saved.
Exactly. Yeah. If you think you're a progressive Adventist and Sabbath is just, hey, we're just enjoying Sabbath lunch and catching up with our friends, and it's made for us, not man for the Sabbath, not Sabbath for man. Yeah. You're in for a world of pain if you really believe that, because Sabbath is a salvational issue for Adventists.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And
mate, so, I really enjoy our chats. Thank you so much for coming on today.
I've enjoyed it a lot too. It's almost like there's nobody else watching.
I know. When I clicked off the comments before and just brought the two of us on the main big screen, I was like, wow, this is just like having a conversation. Just going to bring up this here. Andy Mack has been going on a journey the last little while. It says, this is my next step, removing from the role. And I just want to say, look, good on you. I don't think many people that are, as I said earlier, that are multi-generational Adventists leave the church. And I think there's something wrong with that. When I left, I had a lot of messages, hey, we're going to miss you and all this sort of thing. And I said, I haven't gone anywhere. I still live in town. We're still going to catch up in the shops. And that blew people's minds. There should be much more acceptance by Adventists of Adventists who leave. And so, Andy, I just want to say to you, I encourage you, go and take your name off the roll if you've come that far. My mission isn't to make people leave the church. But if you're someone that's come this far, Andy, go and do it. But be prepared for a little bit of a mental health turbulence. So you reach, there's plenty of people on SDAQ&A you can reach out to. Reach out to me if you want. Happy to help talk you through that kind of stuff. So any closing remarks?
Well, I would tell people on this whole issue of Ellen White, I know where the faithful people are coming from. And if you can reconcile it and find new ways to do what you call understanding how inspiration really works, that's fine. I couldn't. And I took the path that Walter Ray perhaps suggested didn't want to take, and that is saying, well, let's apply that standard across the board. And one thing that I was taught as an Adventist growing up is you follow truth wherever it leads you. And I took that to mean really wherever it leads you, not just wherever it leads you within the church. And it was hard to leave, because I have friends that I really do, that some that I don't feel comfortable with, many that I still do. But you got to be true to yourself above all else, and feel like you can look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, I'm trying to learn more and more, and I'm satisfied that so far I've gone the right direction.
Imagine living your whole life, coming to those last few breaths and realizing that you just pretended your way through it.
Yeah.
And deep down, you knew, that this wasn't for you, but you just pretended. Like that pastor that said, I'm recommending this book to you, Sapiens. That might tell you a little bit where I'm at.
Yeah.
Okay, I know exactly where you're at, but I know that you're preaching every Sabbath as well.
Yeah. And I've had, well, I'm afraid if I say something that might identify the person, but I've had at least one pastor I can think of who's told me that, the story of the atonement is silly and made up, but that's
the thing is, what'll make it certain that no one will work out that you say is that so many say that. So many that I interviewed in season 2, 86 interviews. So many of the scholars and academics, even live, said the atonement of the cross, nothing happened in 1844 supernaturally.
Yeah.
But Adventism is brilliant and wonderful. We love it. It's providential. Look at the church, look at the schools, look at the health message. Okay, that's fine. But, imagine if that's not fine with you.
Yeah.
And you go to your grave, those last moments of breath, and you think, I lived this life as an actor on the stage. And I'm not saying everyone has to be open and blunt and just say whatever comes to your mind. I certainly don't.
Yeah.
In many ways, you've got to read between the lines with a lot of what I say as well. But I know who I am, and I'm more and more able to be that person as time goes by. And I love that sense of being able to just be you, be your own person. It's a very healing thing. So back to Andy Mack, when you go your first little leaving moment and you take your name off the roll and you lose your identity, I promise you that once you work through that, it's way better on the other side.
Yeah. And I lost what I was going to say. Yeah. It's, you need to,
Your true person, your true self.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Though it's fascinating. Somebody asked yesterday, why are you here? Well, I find it interesting. It's endlessly fascinating. Why are you doing this show? Because you find it fascinating. It's interesting to see how people are thinking, why they think the way they do. And
I love going to Star Trek conventions. I think I told you the other day, I started years ago a JFK assassination Facebook group, and kind of left it, and I visited it the other day. It's got over 6,000 members. I started it, and I had nothing to do with it, but at the time there, for a couple of years, I was like, I'd get the Zapruder film, and I'd find out there's another one here that they didn't have the staples in, and so you can see a little bit more, and I'd watch every frame. Blip, blip.
Yeah.
Here we go. Blip.
There you go. Yeah.
I've just got that inquiring mind, and Adventism is just so fascinating. It is such an incredible. Like I would hate for people like Gil Valentine and these guys to leave the church, because I such incredible. They've got insights that just only work if they're inside producing material.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. I feel that way. 100%. I think I made a mistake. I look more washed out than I did last time. My wife pointed out tonight, there was a light bulb burned out there. We need to replace it. I think it's too bright now. Oh, well.
It makes you look younger.
There we go. Cover up the wrinkles.
Hey, thanks so much. And, this has just been a really great conversation. And, I think we'll do it again. I was just going to say, too, one of the things about this, such an interesting thing, when Jim Wagner has been releasing these letters and stuff from that era, it's just like, oh, wow, I'm a pig in mud. This is just awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
And people often say, oh, you see, you're still an Adventist. You can take, you can go, what is that saying? You can take the boy out of Adventism, but you can't take Adventism out of the
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
but
And I
yeah,
want to thank, I see Kevin wrote, thanks to you both. Kevin, I salute you. You're a great guy, able to converse and go back and forth with people
yeah,
like us and still be gracious. That's
yeah,
I think that's so laudable,
yeah.
so admirable.
Thank you, Kevin. And don't forget, everyone, tomorrow my interview with Emmanuel Jesus Champion, the champion
All
of Jesus
right.
and Emmanuel. The internet is going to explode with people watching and commenting. So that's at 5:30 LA time Wednesday evening, and Sydney 12:30 lunchtime, New South Wales time. So
I want proof. I want proof from him. Proof.
well, yes, I don't. I've got no idea where that conversation is going to go. Dale Hutchings has just written, I wrote a letter to my pastor in 1991. I found out in 2050 my name is still on the books. Go and sort that out. And thanks again. I've got their little QR code there. Buy me a hot drink. And I really appreciate the support. Thank you, everyone. I'm putting a lot of time into this. As you can tell, I do love it. I would do it for free. But, I've got 2 little kids to put food on the table and shelter. And so I really appreciate the donations. Thank you very much. Okay, well, it's time to say farewell to Arthur Klym, my very special guest. Put up some of those love hearts there if you're on Facebook, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. See you later.
Bye-bye.